Welcome to the Exponential Athlete Podcast. My name is Ken, and the ambitious goal here is to compile the most extensive research into greatness in sports ever. Now, I do that by doing deep dives into individual athletes, where I do a case study of what makes them successful. I complement these case studies with interviews from athletes, from support staff, and from technologists who are at the cutting edge of sports performance. Today, we're going to look at Roger Federer. This is part one of my series on Roger Federer. And when I started, I was a little worried. I got about halfway into one of the first books in my course of study, and I was concerned that I didn't see a lot of the characteristics that I saw in Kobe Bryant and in Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods, he was seemingly destined for greatness from a young age. He was cultivated very early. His mindset was set very early. Same thing with Kobe Bryant. He had this unbelievable work ethic. He had this kind of FU mentality that he was going to become the greatest through sheer hard work. And again, Roger Federer didn't exhibit this. I also have to say that at this current point in time, because generally after a lot of these books have been written, both Novak Djokovic and Rafa Nadal have passed Roger in how many major championships they have. With all that being said, I'm still super happy that I kept reading and kept doing this research, because Roger Federer might be the most interesting and practical case study that I've seen so far. So since Roger didn't necessarily start with this incredible mindset, he had to develop it over time. Because he had to develop it over time, we get to see what things went into making that change in his life. Roger also had a very different career than a Kobe or a Tiger Woods. Roger was largely injury-free over his very long career. We don't necessarily see this with a Tiger or a Kobe Bryant. We also see that Roger had arguably better life balance. It seemed like he was able to adjust to his family, to the media, to the demands of the game better than anyone that I've seen to date. And some would argue that is the pinnacle of success in sports, is if you can dominate in your domain, but also win off of the court or off of the golf course as well. So to me, this is an incredible case study of maybe how we do all of these things together really well, rather than just dominating our sport and letting some of the other aspects of our life leave us. Again, Federer was unbelievably dominant. So he won 103 singles titles and 20 majors. That's 1,251 singles match victories, as well as 131 doubles match victories. As I'd mentioned, Federer's journey didn't necessarily start out on a high note. He was an emotional kid. He had some anger issues that he had to deal with, although he was very talented. In part one of this series, we're going to dive into what his red flags were when he was growing up and how he eventually got over those. I think this will resonate with a lot of us. I don't think any of us are really there where we're completely optimizing on our skill set. There's areas we can improve, and this is a great case study of how someone can mature and improve in their sport. In part two, we're going to look specifically at longevity. How was Roger able to have such a long career, one, get injured so infrequently, and also play at such a high level for such a long period of time? And in part three, we're going to focus on how Roger was able to get this incredible advantage that he did. We're talking about the advantage of home field advantage on basically every court that he played on. I'll go a lot more into that, into his view of competition, his mindset, all of these things that add up to the greatness that he was. And then finally, in part four, we're going to look at a little bit into the natural advantages he had, how he was raised by his parents. And for coaches or anyone who's raising a kid, this is a really important section, because you get to see what shaped the Roger Federer as he was going, what his parents did well, what they might not have done well. And we'll also dive into perhaps the consequences of Roger's success. I think that section will be a little bit shorter for Roger than some of the other people that I've studied. But again, I'm so excited to be able to bring you along this journey, especially in part one here, because this was truly a case study of a person that I think can have a tremendous impact on how we view our own greatness and how we go about achieving it. So let's jump into part one, which is the metamorphosis. So in this one, we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the red flags that Roger had early in his career, and we'll talk about how he was able to overcome these things. So the red flags are obviously what he could work on, some of the deficiencies that he had. He was very talented, but there were things that were holding him back from reaching his potential. When we dive into his transformation, we're going to focus on a couple things. So how he got the right people around him, how he changed his perspective, what his personal view of improvement was, how he was able to build confidence, and then finally we'll touch on who came before him and what he learned from them that allowed him to make this transformation. When many people think of Federer, they think of a man completely under control, someone able to produce his best in a seemingly effortless manner, someone who's made a very difficult sport look easy. All of that's true, but before he became a world beater, Federer went through the kind of development issues all top young players do. As a teenager, Federer was a perfectionist, someone who'd not settle for good when brilliant was possible. It led him to great heights, like becoming the world's top-ranked junior, but it also led to frustration when things didn't go his way. His release was to throw his racket and get angry. So a small example there where, yes, he's going through these growing pains, but he went through a lot of the same things that any of us would experience. Not necessarily reaching our potential when we feel like there's so much out there, not necessarily being able to make all the movements and do all the things we know we're capable of in the heat of competition. So before we dive into what his red flags really were, let's take a look at how other people viewed Roger when he was coming up. This is another pro he played with quite a bit. I practiced him a few times and played against him a few times, and I thought to myself that he was potentially a top 10 player of the future and that he possibly had the game to win a Grand Slam title. He was obviously a massive talent, but he didn't yet have the right temperament or the right equilibrium. In those early years, he was a little bit up and down with his practice. Some days would be good, other days wouldn't be too good. I didn't imagine at the time that he would go on to become the greatest player who ever played the game, which is how I view him now. So again, early in Roger's career, there were clear gaps in his game. We're going to talk about what those are, but one through this is that he wasn't necessarily dedicated to practice, very different from how we viewed Tiger or Kobe Bryant. This is Pete Sampras on Roger's potential. If I played him the next day, I'd be more prepared. But I was just a little bit uneasy. At that point, he was very good. A couple years later, he became great. I knew he had talent and was going to be around for a while, but I don't think anyone could have predicted he was going to dominate for the next 20 years and do all those things that he would do. It's not like Tiger Woods or LeBron James, where since they were 12, you knew they were going to be superstars. For me and Roger, you just didn't know. It's not so clear-cut in tennis. It takes time to evolve. Again, this is a story that should be good for all of us to hear if we're not where we'd like to be with our profession or with our sport yet, is that there is time to evolve and there is a roadmap for how to evolve. It's kind of the whole point of this podcast is we're trying to figure out what are the most practical steps to take to achieve greatness in whatever sport it might be. In addition to that, Roger's parents didn't even think that he necessarily had this crazy potential. They knew he could be good. They knew he could probably play at a professional level, but there were clearly things holding him back from achieving the greatness that he went on to do. If we look at this in comparison to a Tiger Woods, Tiger's dad had no doubts. He even prophesized that he would be more than golf. He would change the world. He was like the second coming. He was the chosen. And it's interesting to see how different that is for most athletes. I would argue most athletes don't necessarily have to go through the pressure of that, but they also don't necessarily have as little to improve upon as Tiger did when he was growing up compared to their peers. So more specifically, what did Roger do wrong when he was growing up? Where did he need this improvement? Federer needed work, lots of work. You have to say it like it was, Dorochenko told me. So Dorochenko was one of his early coaches. Roger was fragile emotionally. He could not accept defeat, and he was mediocre in training. He was not a big worker. He was fooling around most of the time. In terms of fitness, I demanded a lot from him and had him do 1-hour runs that frankly had no utility for tennis. But it was good for the mental side to toughen him up. So not a hard worker. That's the first thing we have to look at. There's also some elements of technique that he had some shortcomings in. So the forehand was great, but his backhand needed major work. He wasn't able to hit topspin on the backhand. So everyone was like, oh, this guy's good, but he'll never be great until he can go over his backhand. He struggled on the tour for the first few years that he played. I played him a few times, and I remember him having a hard time against me because he had no topspin backhand. This lack of a backhand, he obviously could hit a chip backhand, but he couldn't hit overspin on the ball. It made him fairly predictable and not necessarily easy to play because his forehand was so dominant, but there was a glaring hole that a lot of people could exploit. In addition to that, Roger's game wasn't necessarily a fit for his body. He was always the more risky player, even tried to play serve and volley, which didn't pay off at such a young age. With his forehand, he tried to force, but he made too many mistakes and his backhand was a huge weakness. That's where I nailed him. So this is obviously another competitor he was playing against. And we saw this with Kobe as well, as Roger's physical ability, his strength, his speed didn't match what he wanted to do in his head. And for Kobe, he viewed that in the long term, okay, I'll eventually get there. For Roger, it was very frustrating because he saw what he wanted to do. He thought he could do what he wanted to do with the ball and, spatially on the court, but he just couldn't get there at that point in time. There's also weaknesses in Roger's mentality. The greatness would be in the forehand, the footwork, the serve, the timing, the court sense, the planning, and appetite for more. But there was another undeniable weakness in those early years: Federer's mentality. The tears were Federer's reflexive response to defeat. He knocked over a few chessboards after losing to his father. His competitiveness was extreme, and his sensitivity left him vulnerable to others and expectations. So Roger isn't necessarily mentally strong, as we would say at this point in time. And sometimes it's okay to be volatile, to get angry, to do these things. But if it costs you in performance, it costs you energy in terms of training time, then it's not a very effective use case. He was also relatively volatile. Emotionally, Roger was on a razor's edge, Fries said. First of all, to be a teenager is not easy, and when Roger left his family for Ecoublanc, that was already a tough transition. Having to learn French and go to school in French was also complicated. And then there was tennis. A lot of the time, he didn't mean to do it, but he just sometimes couldn't help himself. And this is in reference to his volatility, his outburst, all the things that went wrong. There was a lack of maturity to be able to think his way out of the situations and not just react. He really just wasn't able to manage his feelings. And it's interesting to compare now to his career, where over the course of the latter half of his career, he was someone who was probably the most composed on the court that we can think of. Early on, for example, when he would try to deal with frustration, he would scream, he would have his coach drive around blasting Metallica and just yell. He would bang his head into his pillow. These are not necessarily adult coping mechanisms for frustration, but they were how he would outlet his stress and frustration then. Thankfully, he's developed and learned a lot of different ways to cope. But again, these are all skills that we can develop. And these issues of volatility, they carried over to competition. So Roger and Lleyton had never played each other before, but both guys knew each other's reputation. So Lleyton Hewitt, early in Roger's career, was one of his biggest competitors. They were both essentially prodigies that were coming out. Lleyton out of Australia, Roger out of Switzerland. And there was a little bit of a rivalry, but they were also friendly with each other. Both guys knew each other's reputation, so there was a lot of pride on the line. It was on from the very first game. They were trying to get into each other's heads, the gamesmanship, the bouncing of rackets, the swearing, and the arguing with the umpires, just everything. I didn't know what had hit me because it was the first time I'd ever really watched Lleyton play a match. Certainly the first time I sat on the court with him. And this was like McEnroe and Connors, two 15-year-olds going at it. Both guys ended the match basically in tears. I think Lleyton threw his racket into the back fence at the end. So neither of these two players were able to really control themselves, and over the course of the match, it was completely exhausting, tiring for them, and neither of them played to their potential. Another aspect that was really holding Roger back early in his career was his immaturity. He had a really good slice backhand, a really good serve, and just was very unorganized, very unfocused, playful, and very adolescent. He joked a lot in the players' lounge and laughed really loudly. He was a little juvenile. He was always on the internet watching head-to-head matchups, yelling loudly who was overtaking who. So a lot of these things probably aren't good. The lack of organization, the lack of focus. You would expect most professional athletes to be pretty good at those characteristics. But playfulness and adolescence, I don't necessarily view as a bad thing. And we'll see that Roger was able to keep a lot of the good characteristics and find a way to manage the bad characteristics, which I find very unique. A lot of the time we go too far in eliminating the playfulness and the joy that we have as kids, and that can hurt our performance in the long run. He was always fidgeting, bouncing a ball, moving around. He was difficult to teach because of it. He also really couldn't manage his energy. He always had to be moving. He always had to be doing something. He always had to be stimulated. And for coaches or people that he was working with, that could be really frustrating. In addition, I guess still under the broader umbrella of immaturity is that he would give up on his matches. So it happened early in his career in 1998, where he was essentially called out for not trying in a match. It was all too easy to flash back to a Lundgren comment from earlier in the tournament. When he's behind, Roger sometimes still has a hard time fighting. So Lundgren was one of his first coaches. He won Wimbledon in 2003 with him. And so he got a very good look into the young Roger Federer who was making the transition out of a lot of these challenges. He also couldn't maturely deal with failure. So he had a lot of tears, a lot of broken rackets, a lot of tantrums. Like anyone moving from juniors to seniors, Federer was finding transition hard. From winning most weeks, suddenly he was beaten by older, stronger players. He was not enjoying himself. So it's one thing to be beating other kids, to be, for example, #1 junior in the world winning the junior Wimbledon, but going and turning professional and playing against people who are dramatically better than you, have more experience, are more physical, there are limitations that you have. Federer turned pro when he was 16, and he was playing against 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, when he necessarily wasn't completely developed. And if you think about it psychologically, for someone who has a tough time losing, has a tough time understanding and comprehending loss, that can be a compounding factor that's not very good. So it's important for us to look at where we stand in our journey with our win-loss record. If we're losing against competition that's physically larger when we're going up a level. We saw this with Kobe Bryant when he was playing in the Sunny Hill League for the first time. He went over points in a summer, and it was a learning lesson for him. Again, Roger wasn't necessarily taking these things as learning lessons because he wasn't as mature as he could have been. And finally, Roger was really disorganized. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think it's important to dive in a little bit deeper. So Federer was spontaneous and very talented, but he had no continuity. For fitness training, I had to go find him sometimes because he forgot to come. It was a pain, and his apartment was a disaster zone. You cannot imagine. In the morning when I went there, we could not even tell if he was there or not. It was that messy. So you think about the successful athletes that we've studied, they were unbelievably detail-oriented. They were organized. They were regimented. No one had to wake Kobe Bryant up in the morning. No one had to tell him to practice. How different is this to a Roger Federer that we're seeing here? The other aspect that we're looking at is his perfectionism as well. You have a Roger Federer who wants to do everything well, but is not putting in the work to do all these things well. That doesn't necessarily make for a recipe for success. In the early days on tour, Federer concerned himself a little too much with always playing the classiest, the most gorgeous shot. There was a danger that his matches were tipping into trick shot shows and that he was selecting the technically difficult and spectacular over the smart. He was almost as concerned with creating a highlight reel as winning the match. That did not just apply to his backhand, but to every part of his game. How many matches did he lose because he felt a pressure from the crowd to create the prettiest point that they'd ever seen? For a long time, according to Peter Lundgren, Federer regarded himself as an artist and liked to watch his matches back on video. I have to admit, Federer once said, that when I joined the professional tour, I liked to think I was bringing something special and I would show off. I really felt as though I had to please the crowd, but it made me lose. This is no longer how he thinks about tennis, obviously. But that perfectionism, if not targeted in the right way, can be something that really holds us back. It can also be something that creates a negative spiral in our thoughts because we're never meeting the ideals that we create in our head. The last red flag that I want to highlight before we talk about how he got around these things is his training approach. Okay, he was lazy, but he had an incredible forehand. Physically, he was weak, Lundgren said. And the backhand was a nice swing, but no legs. Clear deficiencies in his game, and the reasons for the deficiencies were in his laziness or his lack of work ethic early on. It wasn't easy working with Federer as he was rarely on time. He used to arrive late for training, and you had to consistently push him to get to begin the coaching sessions. He wasn't that interested in working and got bored easily because he could do the exercises without any problems. Despite all that, he put a lot of himself into it. So you're seeing the typical lazy genius, right? Where Federer is going in, and if the training's easy for him, he's not going to be engaged. So maybe that's a little secret into how he could get around some of these issues of laziness is if you're meeting the athletes where they're at, it's a little bit easier to get them to be really engaged. Nor did Federer like to rise and shine. Sometimes he slept through the alarm, and I had to go get him. But he was up in 5 minutes. I never saw anyone that quick. So Federer has a really interesting mix of good and bad elements. So once he's there, once he's practicing, he's really focused. He can get into it like I described before, but getting him there, getting focused, it was a little bit harder. And that's something that he really was able to evolve to improve over the course of his career. For a moment, he was struggling just to make it to practice on time and keep his room clean. Not his strength, said Allegro with a laugh. There was a lot of PlayStation. So video games, other distractions, things that would keep him mentally engaged were detriments to his practice. And some would argue that maybe PlayStation or video games or some of these other things were a complement to tennis off the court. Probably not in his early career. He also wasn't interested in school at all. We look at how different that is from Tiger and Kobe. They were both incredible students. Kobe explicitly said that he was pulling insights from school and applying them to basketball in terms of focus and discipline. This is the opposite of the case with Roger Federer. And then the last thing that was a little bit different related to his training is his diet. So Roger was a vegetarian until early, was basically just eating pasta all the time. You think of a little kid that just only eats chicken nuggets. That was the same idea with Roger Federer. And it wasn't until later in his career where he started to integrate sleep and diet and physical training very effectively. So let's dive into the transformation. How did he go from this kid who was unorganized, a little bit lazy, who would show up to practice late and was so volatile off of the court into this seemingly perfect super athlete who was unbelievably composed, who was super fit, who was graceful on the court, and seemed to have everything together unlike any other player before. He seemed to have all the time in the world, even for media and all these sponsorships and all these other things. And to me, this is unbelievable to think about where he came from. I will obviously caveat that he did just get older. There's a part of maturity, just growing up, having your brain develop, but there was a lot of other factors that contributed to this. And now we're going to dive into that. So I just mentioned some of the changes that he made, that he was essentially this super athlete that seemed to have everything together. But it's an interesting thought exercise to see what could have happened if Roger didn't make these changes. What would he have been if he just relied on his talent and didn't improve these other areas of his life? Obviously, this is a hypothetical, but I think that it's worth exploring and thinking about in terms of the impact that habits, strategy, psychology, and all these other things that we're studying can have on over the course of a career. Safin had arguably more charisma off the court with his spontaneity, natural wit, and inability to provide a canned answer. He too spoke 3 languages, Russian, Spanish, and colorful, if imperfect, English. He had a different sort of charisma on court with his expressiveness, quick to boil temper, and penchant for producing winners and errors from unexpected places. That last sentence once would have applied to Federer, of course. Both men shared the dubious honor of having been fined for lack of effort in a pro tournament. But while the Swiss learned to suppress and channel his tennis demons, Safin never got the balance right for long. I get bored too quickly, he once confessed, and angry too quickly too. So many would argue that Safin was very close to being as talented as Federer, but he had some anger issues. He liked to party a lot. He didn't necessarily reel it in like Federer did. And it shows in their career how differently things went. So Safin had 15 career titles and 2 majors. Roger had 103 and 20 majors. I'm not saying that if Safin got it together, he would necessarily have the success that Roger did, but there's a chance that he probably would have won a lot more. And if Roger didn't control his temper and get his life organized and get all these things together, I sincerely doubt that he would have had the 20 majors that he did. So I look at this as a very interesting comparison, and it's probably as close as we could possibly get to seeing what might have happened if Roger didn't make the improvements that he did. I also think it's important to look at a benchmark of how much Roger improved. So there's a great comparison to Lleyton Hewitt. So Lleyton Hewitt, again, him and Roger were coming out at around the same time. Lleyton was considered to be a little bit better than Roger when they first started. Lleyton beat Roger, I believe, in 3 of their first 4 matches. He had a lot of success against Roger early on. And by the time their careers ended, Roger ended up having an 18-9 record against him. So if you're looking at a benchmark to measure Roger against, he has this moving one in Lleyton Hewitt where he was able to overcome him over the course of their careers, which I think is pretty impressive. You would imagine Leighton was improving. Leighton was, not quite as into partying and some of these other things that Safin was. And at the time, they were deemed to be around the same level of skill. Again, Leighton was actually coming out with a little bit more hype than Federer was at the time. And so you can see how Roger was able to surpass and continue to grow over the course of his career, whereas Leighton didn't necessarily evolve in the same way. And I think much of this is due to Federer's approach to improvement, some of the things we'll touch in part 2 and 3, but also to all the factors we're going to touch on his transformation in this episode as well. Let's also look a little bit into what his emotional transformation looked like. So we talked a little bit about how he was able to, he really was volatile with his emotions. He would get the best of himself when he would get angry, and his opponents would be able to win. When the match is over, Federer is not afraid to emote. When the contest is still live, Federer is more than capable of controlling himself. He'll not allow emotions to take hold of him. He's never going to bloody his knuckles by punching his strings, as Andy Murray has, or rant at his guest box, as both Murray and Djokovic has. Very rarely will you see the Roger of old resurface. Many people describe him as having transformed to James Bond, which I think is a funny example to think about how composed he was. And there's probably some things Roger borrowed from a James Bond-like character to be so stoic when he's playing. And this has become an incredible advantage for him as well. Here's one of his childhood friends on the progress that Roger made. We didn't warm up for long when we played together, but we soon played for points. Playing balls long line or cross court for hours on end wasn't our thing. I think it's incredible how Raji changed in that respect, how he managed to achieve the discipline and coolness. I would never have thought that. I always knew he had talent, but I was surprised that he would put in the grueling work every day, and that he would become such a model athlete and dream of all mothers-in-law. I rather thought he would become a character like Gael Monfils, playful and not always so disciplined, a charismatic artist who plays with the audience and occasionally smashes a racket. Roger had a mind of his own and was a rascal in a good way. So how did he make these transformations? That to me is the key. I obviously set it up maybe a little bit too much, but I thought it was important to see how far he's come. So the first thing that Roger did was to get the right people around him. And it's easy to say, he had his parents, there were these coaches in his life. Roger, I think, was very involved in this. And he also had a knack for collecting the right people around him. I can put my hand on my heart and say that I never would have imagined Federer would become who he is. The work that the people close to him did, above all, the one who worked on Federer's head, deserve a Nobel Prize. So that's a pretty strong statement from one of his close family friends. So obviously people are very important for shaping Roger Federer. They were also important for shaping Kobe and Tiger, but the way that Roger has integrated people into his life, the way that he's had people help him and have built these relationships, to me is a skill in and of itself that he did way better than any of the athletes we studied so far. Every single person in Roger's life loved being a part of his life and essentially had nothing bad to say about him. Obviously, that's not true about Kobe and Tiger as well. Federer also truly valued people. He loved people in a way that very few other athletes have. And I want to dive a little bit more, one, into how he's able to create these relationships, but two, into which people played what roles in his life. If we think about this, we can start thinking about who plays what role in our own lives. This was progress indeed, the result of years of work on himself and of constructive criticism from everyone, from his parents to sports psychologist Christian Marcoli, to his coaches, to his girlfriend Mirka Vervenik, who was sitting in the player's box in center court. Peter Lundgren had warned Federer once, "Everybody knows you're the best tennis player, but they fight because if you lose your mind, they have you." What's important with the people around Roger is that they knew how to not ruin the sport for him. So they were adapting to him rather than him necessarily adapting to their style, which I think is really important. That's a little bit of the inverse of how we view coaching now. There are also people he was able to trust over time. We saw issues with that with Kobe. We saw issues with that with Tiger and how tight their inner circles were. But he also allowed others to come in and out of his life, which is, I think, a little bit different For example, with Tiger, once you're out of his life, you're out of his life forever. That is very much not the case with Federer. So how was he able to get so many great people around him? Was it luck? Was it his parents? Or was he just a great evaluator of character? He had a great situation with his parents, who knew a bit about the sport and supported him, but still held back. And he had a golden hand in choosing people who surrounded him. First and foremost with Mirka, who manages his life and the whole trappings. Other parents and women on tour bring more chaos than calm. She is enormously valuable to him. Pierre Paganini, the fitness trainer, was essential for him from the beginning, also in terms of mindset, setting goals and stacking them. He also found a constant in Seve Luti and Tony Godsick, his manager. Roger understood how to build people around him who protected and encouraged him and brought their input so that he got better and better. Many people don't know what it takes in terms of teamwork in tennis to perform as an individual athlete on the court. You need a good group of people so that you can deliver 100% on the court and not get stuck at 93%. He lived this teamwork very distinctively and proved to be a good judge of character when he chose his people. So this is Paul Annacone, who was one of his coaches, on how Federer's team fit into his life.
Well, I think one of the most important things in an individual sport is knowing yourself and knowing your personality in your life and knowing the strengths and weaknesses of that. And I think Roger knows himself really well. He's historically a student of the game, understands the game really well. And he had a bunch of terrific coaches growing up. So the foundation was there. His wife, Mirka, is a former pro player, so she understands the game really well, and more importantly, understands Roger really well. So I think Roger's really interesting insofar as he really enjoys different perspectives. He's an expansive thinker, and I think that's why he's had a bunch of different coaches. And I think also his personality is so affable. That's why, I don't know anybody that worked with him that is not his friend still. So, I mean, ours was a great tenure. I really enjoyed it, but I think it's mostly personality driven. And I don't think there's any ill intent. I think he's a really interested person to hear different perspectives.
So who are these people? How did they help Roger? What roles did they play in his life? I think this is a really important thing to study, because when we think about our own situations, we can start seeing who would fill what roles and if we need to fill these roles themselves. So I'll go just through chronologically who some of these people are, and I'll try to keep it a little bit short. There are two people that really had a huge impact, so it'll be a little bit longer. But the first person is Adolf Kakowski. So this was his coach for 2 years from 1989 to 1991. His first intro to tennis. There isn't a whole lot about him, but obviously you're probably not going to remember a ton about your coach who's teaching you from 5 to 7 years old, basically. The next and one of the largest impacts in Roger's life was Peter Carter. So this is Roger on his impact in his career. Peter brought me a lot. First of all, on the human side, and of course with my tennis. People talk a lot about my technique. If it's so good, it had a lot to do with Peter, although naturally others played a part too. Peter was a nice person, and he gave Roger a big boost. He really made Roger feel like a special player, and he helped him not only with his technique, but with how to play the matches. So earlier in your career, you probably want people that are advocates of you, that are telling you how good you are, that are giving you confidence to go and compete. Later in your career, you'll see that maybe you want a little bit of pushback so that you're not too full of yourself, you're not overestimating yourself, and you're willing to put in all the work. He obviously influenced Roger's style of play as well. A lot of what you see in Federer is very similar to what Peter was. But Federer has that explosive power and the ability to generate enormous amounts of spin, and Roger was a better mover. Peter was very good at everything. He was a good mover, but not great. He was good from both sides, but not great from both sides. He had a beautiful serve, but it wasn't big enough to win 2 or 3 free points a game. Peter had the prettiest game you'd never seen, but unlike Roger, wasn't able to get much pop on the ball. So we saw this, for example, with Kobe Bryant, is that his dad was limited in his game. Obviously, he was very talented, but wasn't much of a leader. Kobe decided to take on some of those characteristics. Roger is learning from Peter Carter and can play the game, but has these additional tools to make the style work. I think it's really interesting how we view our physical attributes with our technical attributes. And it seems as though whether it was through training or whether it was natural ability, Roger was able to combine those two things to make Peter Carter's game really work at the professional level. But it was no coincidence that Federer chose the one-hander. His early professional role models, Becker, Edberg, and Sampras, all had one-handed backhands that they could rip or chip convincingly. Both Kukovsky and Carter were proponents of the stroke, and many of the older boys training at the club used it too. So did Lynette Federer, Roger's mom. I got that beautiful one-handed backhand from Peter, Federer said, managing to sound cocky and differential in the same phrase. And what's interesting is Roger didn't abandon this. This is one of the trademarks of his career, something he had ingrained very early on. He also focused largely on Roger's strengths, which I think is interesting. It's where coaches go wrong a lot, because we spend too much time looking for the areas that are bad or average, Cahill said, and then we concentrate on those areas too much instead of working on strengths. So that was kind of me as an early coach. I was looking for areas that were going to hold him back, and I ignored a little bit of the stuff that was going to make him great. So this is related to Roger's forehand. So Roger's forehand, everyone describes as completely prolific, and it wouldn't have been so great if they weren't adding on to it when he was a kid. He would run around his backhand a lot of the time and hit a forehand, and that would mitigate some of his weakness. He was able to win with just his forehand, but he became truly dominant when he eventually developed a stronger backhand. There's also an element of connecting to comrades that Peter Carter was able to interject into Roger's life, which I think was really important in shaping how he views a team, but also his other competitors. Years later, Federer would remark that Australian traits were locked in my DNA. He said work ethic was very important for Australians, so I felt I profited a lot from that early. Peter was just very important overall for my character. He taught me respect for each person. It didn't matter whether that person was famous or not famous. He just taught me the right values, as did my parents. They got on very well. We were all close to Peter, all of us. So he develops this connection with Australian players, but also the traits. So something he was clearly missing early in his career was this dedication, this work ethic, and he was able to develop some of that with Peter Carter. Peter Carter also eventually passed away at a very early age, and that was a pivotal moment for Roger in terms of perspective and a lot of these things. You obviously wouldn't trade the life of a coach for a perspective shift, but unfortunately, the death of Peter Carter was an inevitability, and we're going to go into the impact that had on Roger in the next section. The next person I'm going to look at is Christian Marcoli. So he worked with Roger from 1998 to 2000 as a sports psychologist. I should also say that Peter Carter worked with Roger from 1991 to 2002, so 11 years. Grovenfeld said he, Carter, Lundgren, and Federer's parents concluded that Federer would benefit from a sports psychologist. So all those people were either his coaches or his parents or involved in the Swiss Tennis Federation. It was decided that it would be best if it was somebody not too old, somebody from his own region, and with an interest that Roger had as well, which was soccer. The idea was that there would be very, very many connecting areas that he could relate to. The search led in 1998 to Basel and to Christian Marcoli, a 25-year-old who had played professional soccer in Switzerland for several seasons, including 3 with Federer's favorite club, FC Basel, before a series of knee injuries and surgeries ended his playing career early in his 20s. So first, I want to talk about what his team is doing for Roger there. They're really meticulous about who they bring in. They're vetting this person to make sure he would probably get along with Roger. They're not just getting any old sports psychologist. They're not just getting the best sports psychologist they could find. They're really catering this to who Roger is as a person. And I know personally, I haven't necessarily viewed things like that in the past. When I've gone to coaches or when I've gone to different training seminars, I'm more focusing on what they teach me than how they teach me. And especially at a young age, how they teach it or if you can resonate with the teacher might matter even more than just how good the information is. So tennis is probably the toughest sport mentally, maybe with golf, he said. When you're confident, every sport is easy. Tennis, when you're not confident, it's very lonely. It's very brutal because it's not over soon. In skiing, in 1 minute, your race is over and you can go home. But from a net time perspective, tennis is brutal. A point might last 5 to 10 seconds, but there are 20 to 25 seconds between points. In a 5-set match, that adds up to a great deal of time to think dark thoughts. So we think about tennis, we think about golf, how much downtime you have. It's probably why these sports are a bit challenging from the mental perspective. Not saying other sports aren't, but when you have a lot of downtime, it's really important for you to be able to develop better mental strategies to cope. So what was Marcoli's approach to helping Roger help him essentially evolve and get a handle on some of his anger and some of the maturity issues? Marcoli focuses on intentionality between points, on players managing breathing patterns and controlling where they look to maximize focus. The big thing to me is always how you use your eyes, he said. But there's another fundamental component to me, which is beyond that, which is, are you at peace with yourself? Is your overall life plan more or less in place, which gives you the fundamental joy to be here in that moment? Or would you rather be somewhere else and solve a problem somewhere else? So one way to do this, he's talking about picking strings, looking at the ball boy, or looking at something that is dynamic on the court. I think this is pretty interesting. This is a very traditional approach to sports psychology, is you get your life right off the court or the course or any of these places, and you can perform your best on the court. That obviously didn't work for someone like Kobe Bryant. So we have the alter ego approach, where you can create these personalities for these different things and compartmentalize very effectively. Roger is very much more the holistic approach, where he was able to make it so every aspect of his life he felt he had control over and enjoyed, but that might not be suitable for everyone. There's going to be adversity that you face in these different areas, and it's interesting to compare and contrast these maybe varying approaches to performance psychology. Everything that I do is focused on the idea that there will be one day where you don't need me, Marcoli told me. I never want to create dependency, never want to create a relationship where people say, I can only be good when you're there. My mantra, and I'm very transparent with them, is I want you to tell me one day, thank you, I get it, I can do it without you. Of course, that day is an emotional day, but I see this as my ultimate responsibility. So inevitably this worked after 2 years. Federer stopped working with Marcoli, and I don't believe ever used another sports psychologist or psychology mental coach. I also think that this is a very good approach for any coaching. You want to obsolete yourself over time. The idea that you're creating dependency is another Achilles heel for any athlete. So if the athletes can figure it out themselves, if they can get through something and develop the tools to handle things on their own, that is the biggest victory that we can have. But sometimes it takes someone else to help get us there to develop these tools. And it seems like that was the case for Roger. And over the course of his life, there's other people that he does feed off of and help him develop different tools that make him successful. The aspect on Federer's side of this is he needed to buy into this. And to me, it's really important that he was able to. Federer, to his credit and benefit, chose to address his mental weaknesses when he was still quite young. He was not yet 17 when he began collaborating with Marcoli. So although he might have done it begrudgingly, he still did it. Of course it helped, Lundgren said. It was up to the player also to take it. Either you believe or you don't. When it came to Roger, I don't think he liked it, to be honest, but he did it. And I think he took the best out of it. To listen to this kind of stuff is not easy, especially when you're that young and the personality he has. It was tough for him. So you have to give a young Roger credit here as well, as he recognized this was a problem and he faced it head on, even if he didn't like to admit that it was a problem for him. Again, what was the results of this training? Federer's great accomplishment has not been that he has managed to turn off his emotions, but that he's trained himself to control these emotions. The rage is still there, but it's buried deep. Just because we think that Federer isn't a street fighter or rip your head off guy, that doesn't mean it's not in there, said Andy Roddick. You don't win all those Grand Slams without having that burning desire. So if we're looking at the sports psychology approaches, it's not that you don't feel these emotions. It's not that you don't get angry or feel any of these things. It's you channel these things into more productive and positive things. Or you're able to get angry and essentially dissipate it as quickly as possible. The next person in his life was Paul Dorochenko. So there are a lot of quotes that I'll read from Dorochenko, who was his strength coach from 1998 to 2000. There aren't a whole lot of things that were necessarily unique about their relationship. He was someone that came into Roger's life and left Roger's life, and obviously was able to tell us a good story about Roger, but wasn't necessarily memorable of note in Roger's overall life. The next coach that was meaningful to Roger was Peter Lundgren, who worked with him from 2000 to 2003. So as a player, Lundgren had been ranked inside the top 25, and he defeated the likes of Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, Mats Wilander, and Ivan Lendl. As a coach, he had worked with the Chilean Marcelo Rios, whose game Federer admired. It had not been an easy call for Federer to make because of his friendship with Carter. It revealed, though, that Federer would not allow personal relationships to cloud what was best for his tennis. So a little bit more context here. So Roger worked with Lundgren from 2000 to 2003, and he chooses Lundgren instead of Carter to go on tour with him. He felt that Lundgren had more experience in professional tennis. So Peter Carter, I don't think ever broke the top 100. Peter Lundgren ended up being a top 25 player in the world and knew what to expect and could largely handle media better for Roger on the road. So Roger is very intentional about who he's choosing here, even though it's a difficult decision. And Peter Carter, obviously still close to him, still a family friend, he understands the decision that Roger's making. I think that's really important for a team that you're working on. This next person had a huge impact on Roger's life. This is Pier Paganini, who he worked with from 2000 to 2020, which is virtually the end of his career. So this is Roger's trainer, his strength coach, someone who many attribute the longevity of Roger's career to. So we'll do a deep dive into the training methodologies that he had in the next section, but I think it's important for us to learn a little bit about what their relationship was like. So you've seen that Roger has some people that have short relationships with him and others that have really long, for example, 20-year relationships with him. Pierre Paganini was Federer's fitness coach. He met Federer in Ecoublanc in 2015 and joined his personal staff in 2000, which made him by far Federer's longest-serving team member. He helped Federer to remain free of major injuries until late in his career and helped him to sustain quickness and agility with an innovative program. But Paganini, a former decathlete who likes to do drills with his athletes and run when they run, was more than a clever and hyper-fit taskmaster. He was Federer's sounding board, occasional spiritual guide, and final word on scheduling, a subtle yet convincing lobbyist for the benefits of dedication and moderation. So Paganini is really one of the people that's driving Federer's view of rest, of performance improvement, of injury prevention, all these things. From the start, Paganini had a long-term view of Federer's health and path and had the confidence and credibility to help him implement it. The most important guy in Federer's career is Paganini, said Gunter Bresnik, a veteran Austrian coach. That is a bold statement, and Bresnik is not alone in putting so much emphasis on Paganini. For me, it's Mirka number 1 and Pierre number 2, said Allegro. If there's a big decision, Pierre would always be involved. But I think Pierre has always had the big picture in mind. Roger trusts him like crazy. So as an athlete, you're really focusing on the next game, the next match, the next set, the next short period of time in your life. Your job is to go out and execute. It's important to have people on your team that can think bigger picture. You're not necessarily thinking bigger picture about your workouts, and when you're a 20-year-old turning professional, you're not thinking about, oh, I want to play for 25 years. You're thinking about winning and getting to the next level and putting the work in to do that. Having someone on your team to think about those things can be very, very valuable, and that's one of the things that Paganini did. But Paganini believed in tennis-specific training, smarter scheduling, improved recovery methods, and bigger support teams would lengthen careers. His vision had proved correct. Looking at the number of players on both the men's and women's tours, deep in their 30s, still playing and even improving with their ranking. It's important to note that Pierre Paganini, I don't think his approach to tennis was necessarily mainstream. He's encouraging a lot of rest. He's encouraging very specific training. He's someone that is doing a lot of the things that we know are really beneficial for longevity now, but at the time, almost 30 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. So Roger is willing to have someone who is willing to push the limits and willing to change things up on his team, and I think that says a lot about both of them. Now, starting in 2000, I would say this person was probably the most influential on Roger's career, period. A lot of people have attributed even 10 of his majors to her. And after learning about his life, after learning about the relationship they have, I actually tend to agree with that. And this person is Mirka Federer, who is his wife. Yes, Roger is a very easygoing guy, and he has an imitable ease on the court. But there's a lot of work behind it, and he was lucky enough to meet many good people along the way, like Pierre Paganini, for me the world's best fitness trainer for a tennis player, or his coach Severin Luthi. But the most important meeting was Mirka, his wife. I always say he owes 50% of his success to her. Without her, his career would not have been possible. Well, I guess I said that previously, but it's important to reiterate how important she was. And we don't necessarily think about our partners as integral parts of our athletic success, but I think she shows that having the right partner, choosing the right partner that supports you can have a multiplicative effect on your career, whatever you're doing. If you choose wrong, if you choose someone that isn't necessarily aligned on your values and the things that you want to achieve, they can generally detract from all the things that you want to achieve in your life. And I really, I took a lot of this to heart, because if you spend half of your life with someone, or a good portion of your life with someone, if they're not super aligned on your goals and your vision, it might not necessarily work out so well for you achieving the goals that you have. This is Roger. Naturally, she's the most important person in my life, along with my parents. And I'm very happy for all she does for me. She will always be my wife or my girlfriend. Everything she does because she enjoys helping me. If she stopped enjoying it, she'd have to stop doing it. And Mirka's really unique because she played professional tennis herself. She understands the lifestyle and the requirements. So Mirka became the ideal complement to Roger. She didn't have it easy as a young tennis player. She had to assert herself. She had a lot of stamina and she needed it to succeed. She is ambitious and persistent, a tough personality, but she also has charm. The fact that Roger found a relationship with her early on, which solidified him, was essential. So Mirka is kind of the opposite of Federer. She's organized, she's structured, she's a hard worker. And Roger coming in was talented, maybe a little bit lazy, rested on his laurels. And he was able to adopt some of these characteristics from her. She's rubbing off on him in a really positive way. It wasn't just that he was observing and building some of these characteristics from her. She was also this massive stabilizing force in his life. I think because Mirka, he was able to really excel when he finally did get to that point where he did win Wimbledon. The years prior to that, he was struggling, but Mirka and Peter Lundgren were such a steady voices for him. I think because of the coaching, but also because Mirka, he was able to overcome a very difficult time where a lot of expectations were on his shoulders, and he could not really live up to that. He felt a lot of pressure. So Mirka is this huge stabilizing force. Federer's breakthrough major win is in 2003 at Wimbledon. And essentially from 2001 to 2003, that's when I believe he made this incredible personal transition. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened with the right people, the right circumstances, and particularly Mirka essentially overhauling his life when they were together at this point in time. Mirka was a couple years older. Obviously, as a female, she was more mature, and she was just able to have really, really positive impacts on Roger, on the court and off the court, and gave Roger almost like a security blanket. That was what he needed. He needed this feeling that people were looking after him, especially after the loss of Peter Carter. So she provided that type of support that maybe only she could have at that point in time. Mirka's the one who really tied up all the loose ends for Federer. I honestly think that the split with Lundgren, it was more her decision than his. She's really not nice, rather cold in fact, but she did a lot of good for Federer because she took care of everything. And the only thing Roger had to do was play tennis. She did all the things behind the scenes, and there are more and more of those. So for a period, she also covered all press. She also did all the sponsor engagements and all these things. And if you think about the athletes we've studied before, we have Tiger, we have Kobe. Kobe's mom lived with him even when he was playing in the NBA to start out. He was doing all his laundry. Tiger was in a similar situation. All they had to do was focus on their sport. And in this circumstance, Mirka made it so that all Roger really had to do was focus on his sport. He didn't have to worry about how messy his room was. He didn't have to worry about getting up on time or doing these things. She helped manage him in a very effective way. And I'm not saying that all professional athletes have to be man-children that are managed by their partners or their parents, but there's something to be said about limiting the friction to pursue your sport in an effective way. And there's plenty of different ways to do that, whether it's on your own, just like creating meal kits or meal prepping or something along those lines, or having an agent or a helper that outsources and does scheduling. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Roger was very lucky that he found Mirka to be able to complement him in this way. Mirka also did a great job creating the ideal lifestyle for Roger. So Roger loves his family. He loved the travel and all these things. And she was able to accommodate and seamlessly integrate all this into his life. So Roger essentially didn't have to worry about any of these things off the court, but he got all the benefits of his family and the locations and the exploration when he was pursuing tennis all the time. The most important thing is that you have a stable woman who always supports you and sometimes puts her interests aside for yours. If you have a girlfriend who always wants to party, that can mess you up. You can't separate Roger Federer, the tennis pro, from Roger Federer, the private person. He is a pronounced family man, never wanting to travel around without his wife and children for any length of time. Mirka made it possible for the family to come along. So how many people, frankly, wives or husbands would want to follow you around with your kids every week, essentially for the majority of the year, 11 months of the year? That's a massive burden on that person, but it's also a burden on any athlete who's traveling without their family, doesn't get to see them, especially if they enjoy seeing their family. So she was able to make this sacrifice so that Roger would be able to see his kids, be able to be a part of their lives and decompress and create this ecosystem for him everywhere he goes. She'd also cook at Wimbledon at their houses, their traditional food that they would eat in Sweden. And that made the lifestyle, she would bring everything to him rather than him having to worry about where he was going to get it. Every day, Mirka was like, "Are we going? Are we going?" Federer said she was ready. If anyone wonders how Federer played on with great success for more than a decade after becoming a family man, much of the explanation is that short paragraph. "She's a rock," Federer said. It's a word he's often used to describe his wife. So strong, and maybe that's from the tennis as well. Her mind is very strong. Also, the way she's handling everything now since the births. It's what I expected from Mirka because she's such a wonderful person, but for her to prove to me and show it to me what a great mother she'll be and is now, it's great. So she's encouraging Roger to do all this stuff. She's facilitating it and encouraging it. She understands how important his career is, how important his ambitions are. And to me, this is really impressive. You don't necessarily see this in a lot of partners, but she's also on board for the mission and understands why she's willing to make the sacrifices she is. So she says, "Roger was my greatest support back then. He gave me back my tennis life. When he wins, it's as if I win as well." Mirka's life changed quickly. Little more than a year after she retired, her boyfriend became Wimbledon champion. With a couple of years, he was dominating tennis. So it worked out really well for her too, is that she gets the benefit of being part of greatness and tennis greatness that she wouldn't have been able to do because of her essentially failing body. She says, "He's the greatest in the world. That's a unique thing in life. My time will come after tennis." That's what we both agreed on. Federer agreed when the phrase was mentioned during the interview in Dubai. "Exactly. For example, if we're on vacation, I do everything she wants to do. If she wants to go shopping for 10 hours, I go with her because she has to wait for me for 10 hours at every tournament. I don't have a problem with that." And they have a very clear arrangement. I mean, something that's kind of unique about sports is that you are very active, you're very engaged for maybe 20 years if you have a long career, and then afterwards you have all this time. And for Federer and for Mirka, they understand how important it is and the value of pursuing tennis greatness. But she realized she also has all this time afterwards to be able to spend with her kids, do literally whatever she wants. If Roger has this incredible career, they can have this incredible life afterwards, and they still have plenty of time to live. Mirka says no other woman could deal with so much tennis. Mirka's role was not restricted to prepping Federer for his matches. For a while, he did not have an agent, manager, diary secretary, so Mirka deputied to organize his life by taking care of his media commitments, as well as travel arrangements and other business. So she is really his ride or die. She is along for the ride, and she understands the mission and is willing to make these sacrifices. I don't think that that's something that everyone can go and find in their lives, but the more people you have around that really understand what you're trying to do, especially if they've been in a similar profession or have similar aspirations, I think that's very important. I think that there's a couple of good books. One is called How to Not Die Alone. If you're looking to figure out how to find a partner that is willing to support your goals, or you're willing to support their goals as well. She also has this beautiful tennis understanding from playing professionally. I think that this is pretty unique for a partner. I like to have tennis conversations with her because I know she's seen me practice and play more matches than anyone there. And this is sometimes why I pick her brain a bit. So Federer is even asking her tennis questions about strategy. I mean, think about it. Your partner has seen you do a lot more of these things than anyone else. Their feedback is probably relevant, especially if they've played at a high level themselves. Mirka has discovered that she can be more influential a figure from the side of the stadium than she ever was when she was out there competing. Federer values Mirka's insights on strategy and technique. There were times before they had children where she would sometimes step in as his practice partner. That tended to be on the morning of a final when everyone else but Federer's opponent had left town and he needed someone to warm him up before play. I just think that that's kind of a cute story. I mean, he won, I think it was 3 or 4 majors in a row where she had warmed him up before his final match. Mirka remained part of Federer's tennis brain trust for years, even after veteran coaches like Tony Roach, Jose Higueras, and Paul Annacone joined the team. I don't ever remember her going, Paul, why can't you get Roger to do this or that? It was never like that at all. But the bigger the occasion, the more likely she would ask a question or two. So she's involved in this process. She's involved in his career. I mean, again, that's probably too much to ask for most people, but I also think it's important and interesting to view from the perspective of your teammates, your partners, any of these types of things is how invested are they in your success? Do they really believe in what you're doing? She clearly is believing in Federer and what he's doing. And she's really involved in who comes onto the team. She's this additional filter for Roger. So, Roger obviously is good at choosing these people, but he has Mirka, he had Pierre Paganini, who also vet anyone that comes into the team. To me, creating this ecosystem is very powerful. So when he's interviewing Paul Annacone, when he came in to Zurich in 2010 for what was essentially a trial run, he had dinners with Roger and Mirka together. Annacone already knew Mirka socially through his former employer Tim Henman and through Federer's agent Tony Godsick. Mirka was really direct, Annacone said. She was asking questions saying, this is where Roger had issues strategically. What's your philosophy about this stuff? It was really information gathering. I never felt I was under the gun. And Roger was the same way. She also is relentlessly protective of those she loves, her husband and her family, and by the way, the people who work in that group. Creating something like that is, again, maybe very difficult, but it can pay these incredible dividends over time. And I think there are ways you can do it effectively and ways that you don't necessarily do that effectively. For example, Tiger growing up, he had Team Tiger, he had Jay Brunza, he had some of these other people that were around his coaching staff, but they didn't necessarily keep that going in an effective way because they were so scared of outside voices, new voices. It wasn't necessarily from Tiger himself. It was more from his parents who were creating this atmosphere. And I think for it to be really successful, you as an individual have to know what you want, and you have to be able to bring these people around you that are very effective. Mirka is also a big motivator. So this is the last thing on Mirka. I think it's important to do the holistic perspective. Roger's partner is pretty important. I think for any of us who are athletes or are people who are looking to reach the pinnacle of our craft, choosing a partner might be a dramatically larger part of that than we realize. And if we can look at a case study that I believe to be a good case study, it's worthwhile to dive and spend a little bit of extra time on that. Mirka was a big believer in me not wasting any sort of talent, Federer told me many years later, because she knew herself that she was limited to a degree. She was extremely hardworking, but she knew with my talents, I could achieve so many more things. And that belief was very influential. So it's not just that she's supporting him and helping him, she's also believing in him. Not to get too personal, but in my own life, I think a lot of the relationships I had in the past, the people that I was dating, they didn't believe in me as much as I did. And fortunately now I'm in a situation where that's not the case. And that was something that has been a huge multiplier for any of the things that I've been producing, including this podcast. This is Roger again. If I'd ask her if I had one of my down moments, really, do I still need to keep doing this? She'd be like, you decide, but I think it's totally worth it. Look at how well you're playing, and I can tell when you're playing good or bad. She's super honest, and she's always been of the opinion that as long as I can play, I can always achieve great things. So it's nice to hear that from your wife. So she believes it, but she's also telling him this in his time of need. She's also willing to push him when maybe he's doubting himself, and she can do it in a way that's effective to him. She's like, look at your little injury, Federer said, raising his pitch to imitate her voice. Your little knee thing, that's nothing. Look at other guys, what they have, or look what I had. That's bad. So you'll be fine, trust me. The only thing we have to worry about is that you played maybe 1,400 matches in your career. That's the only problem we might run into. But this knee thing, come on, man, this is peanuts. So that's how she talked to him. And I think that's good. I mean, she's clearly comfortable that she can chide him a little bit and encourage him in that way and put things into perspective. I mean, in the Chatter episode from the Tiger series, we talked about how important perspective and changing these things are. And having a partner that understands that and can put things into perspective for you can pay massive dividends in your career. The next two coaches I want to look at are Tony Roach and Jose Higueras, who were very specifically called in for one thing. So some of these other people, they're part of Roger's life for a long period of time. They're part of a larger arc. Some coaches he just brings in to fulfill a specific purpose. So we had a new coach, Tony Roach, the reserved, lantern-jawed Australian born in Wagga Wagga, who in his playing days had won the French Open, now the only major title that Federer lacked. Federer also brought in Jose Higueras, the much-respected Spanish coach, to help him with the clay court season beginning in Estoril. Higueras, a former Spanish star who now lived on a ranch in Palm Springs, California, had been instrumental in Michael Chang and Jim Courier winning the French Open. That was still the only major Federer lacked. So Roger brought in both of these coaches to help him chase a specific goal. He wanted to win the French Open, which was the only major at that point he hadn't won, and he wasn't nominated. He'd actually lost to Nadal. I think it was in 4 straight French Opens. I think at least 3 or maybe all 4 of them were in the finals. And he needed and wanted to crack that code. So he's bringing in people very specifically for that purpose. They're both specializing in clay. I believe Higueras was left-handed, or maybe it was Tony Roach that was left-handed, to be able to help him understand how to beat Nadal. If you have this one single obstacle, maybe it pays off to be able to target it with coaching. On the face of it, this was highly successful, with Federer winning 6 Grand Slams in 2.5 years they spent together. Roach himself, a lefty, there it is, he's a lefty, helped Federer get into the mind of his left-handed rival Rafa Nadal. But Roach was only with his client around the Grand Slams. Long periods would pass without Federer and Roach communicating, apart from the odd text message from the coach saying, well done or good luck. It had been too quiet between us, Federer said, when explaining why they split just a fortnight before the 2007 French Open. So that shows maybe the life cycle of a relationship like that. Is what does Federer want out of it? What is he getting out of it? But again, they split completely amicably. And Federer did, a little spoiler alert, he did go on to win the French Open in 2009. The next person who's another longstanding advisor to Roger is Severin Luthi. So Luthi is the most underestimated coach on tour, Bresnik told me. He's also very modest, low-key, never wants to be in the front, but he's there all the time. He did a really good job in a difficult period. I'd say technically he's not the best coach. He's not someone who would develop a player teaching strokes, but being around and understanding what a player needs, when to be pushed, when to be left by himself, finding the right moment to say something. He's one of the best in the world, definitely. So there's a couple roles that Luthi is playing here. All right, so he's not going to be like a swing coach. He's not going to be working on form and technique. Roger generally brings in people for that. He's coming in and he actually fills a lot of the role that Mirka was filling. So at this time, Mirka had a set of twins. She goes on to have another set of twins. She's a little busy, can't be doing as much administrative stuff as she was before. And Luthi fills this role unbelievably well, managing the team, managing the other coaches, and also managing Roger and his emotions. So him and Paganini are kind of bouncing off each other in order to help create this team and trusting environment for Roger. No one was better at understanding Federer's game and personality than Luthi. The knowledge is worth far more than any celebrity status. As a coach, he's really valuable to me. This is Federer. He knows my game very well. He knows my practice sessions very well. He knows what I need to work on, Federer said. He knows what makes me happy and makes me sad. So something that we learn about all the coaches that Federer has for the long term is they know him unbelievably well, and they can adapt the practice, they can adapt the training, they can adapt all these things to who he is. His training approach is probably unlike anyone else's because it's so custom tailored to who he is and what makes him happy and what he's willing to do that he's completely optimizing for all of his ability because his team knows him so well. I think it's a very powerful skill. For the last 10 years, Federer has worked with a number of coaches with much more recognizable faces like Paul Annacone, Edberg, Ivan Lubicic. Yet the ever-present Luthi has been instrumental in making these partnerships work. He knows Roger better than anyone else. A lot of the value that he brings is the combination of two things: that he knows the game and the person, and that means he's able to give Roger very clear instruction and a clear evaluation of what's going on. And then Roger is able to digest that information quickly and adjust as needed. That's really helpful. So again, he's acting like this team manager. You see this a lot with, for example, golfers. They have an agent, they have a coach, they have a caddy, they have this manager that helps to make everything work and facilitates everything. Again, all of this is specifically aimed at allowing Roger to just play tennis and show up to practice and have fun and go to travel and do these things and not have to worry about his family and his kids and accommodations and all these things, right? How good would we all be at our job if we just got to do the exciting parts to the best of our ability? I know I would be really good, hopefully better. I'm working on that with the podcast. So hopefully we'll see if I improve over time here and the messaging gets better. Next coach is Paul Annacone. So he is the coach of, he was a coach of Pete Sampras, someone that Federer idolized, looked up to, and then eventually became really good friends with. He coached Roger from 2010 to 2013. And in 2008, Roger essentially loses to Rafa on grass. And this ended the 5 Wimbledon streak that Roger won in a row. And so he brings in Paul Annacone to hopefully reclaim some of that grass dominance and really get his game back there. Again, this is a very targeted, hey, I'm going to bring this person in for this specific reason. He also is very clear about why he ends things. So he just wants more variety, wants someone more involved in the process. And at the time, that's not something Paul Annacone can provide. They're on very good terms. I've listened to a ton of interviews with Paul Annacone, and I've linked them in the show notes with all the other books and other resources I've used. But he has nothing but good things to say about Roger Federer as a coach, and they still connect, which I think is really cool. After Annacone, he brings in Stefan Edberg. So he's a tennis legend, and I can clearly see Stefan Edberg's influence in his net play. The Swede pointed out, the right side volley is much more solid, and the decision not to play out long points to resolve them up front are other contributions by the part-time trainer whom Federer hired in 2013. So Federer is getting older, but he realizes he needs to innovate. He needs to change his game in order to win. So this is essentially during one of the biggest slumps of Federer's career. He's getting beaten by Nadal. He's starting to get beaten by Djokovic and some other people. And he realizes he needs to innovate his play. And he brings in Edberg to essentially change up his game, change up his approach. And he does just that. It'd be a mistake, though, to reduce Edberg's contribution merely to his success at getting Federer to the net. For instance, he tweaked Federer's approach to training between tournaments. Previously, Federer would often not play points during practice weeks, only doing so in the days before an event. But Edberg convinced Federer that he should always play points in practice, regardless of when he was next in competition. So he maintained his rhythm. He also introduced or helped Roger come up with a new move, which he calls the sneak attack by Roger, SABR. Roger, as he's getting older, he's very intelligent. His team is also very intelligent about speeding up the game. So it's counterintuitive to think that you'd want to play faster when you get older, but the faster you play, the less times you hit the ball, the less you're exerting yourself. And so he's getting older. If he speeds up the game, he has to run less far and he can preserve his body. And the sneak up attack by Roger, coming to the net and volleying, is something that he is doing that is shortening the points in a unique way. Unlike the great majority of partnerships on the men's circuit, this collaboration did not finish with the coach being fired, cast aside like an old, unwashed sweatband. Instead, there was a rare sight of both parties staying dignified, with each still speaking warmly of each other. They had a really successful run together, with Roger reaching 3 Grand Slam finals, and in all 3 of those, Roger ran into a guy, Novak Djokovic, who was playing some phenomenal tennis. Paul Annacone said, so Federer turned to Ivan Ljubicic for his coaching needs. In his day, Ljubicic's game style was fundamentally, as a baseline basher, quite different to Edberg. But that's not to say that Ljubicic's appointment was in any way to wipe out what Federer and Edberg had accomplished together. So again, you're seeing this amicable split for someone who he's worked with for a long time. The last coach that he worked with before he retired was Ivan Ljubicic, and he was someone that Federer actually played against. And it's interesting to see why he brings him in at this point in his career. Lubicic still believed in Federer's chances. And I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I apologize directly to Ivan. But my greatest strength is not foreign names. It was one of the reasons he had agreed to work with his friend. An offer Federer had sprung on him over dinner in London during the 2015 ATP finals. Unlike the significantly older Edberg, Lubicic had an advantage of having faced many of Federer's potential opponents and having scouted the others when he was working with Runnick. Federer's decision to hire Lubicic was also another indicator of how much he valued long-term connections. For the first time, Roger had hired a coach who had once been an opponent and frequent practice partner on the ATP World Tour. 16 times, Federer and Ivan Lubicic had met, and with the Swiss victorious on 13 occasions, and they had trained together dozens of times over the years. However, in contrast, 2017 would turn out to be a remarkable year. That had quite a lot to do with Severin Luti's influence, but also the work of Lubicic did refresh and reinvigorate Federer's single-handed backhand. This is one of the things that allowed him to have a ton of success against Nadal in 2017, and I believe in 2018 as well. And so Roger brings in Lubicic because he is struggling with these modern opponents, and Lubicic is another mind who's faced them, that knows how to perhaps navigate them and understand them and break down their game. I think that's very savvy as he's developing his career. He can bring in someone who can scout these unique people and help create game plans. The other coaches he's had, none of them are really, all of them really kind of far removed from playing. And this is a different perspective that he needs. The last person that Roger has in his life is Toni Godsick, who's his agent. So he started working with them after Mirka decided she didn't want to do a lot of the admin anymore. And he is a great resource for Roger. He clearly understands how to buffer Roger from responsibilities that are not adding value to his tennis. And that's something, for example, that Tiger struggled with early in his career. He had an agent that just was focused on making as much money as possible, and that detracted from his golf. Godsick is doing something very similar to Steinberg for Tiger, which is buffering and only being very specific with their partnerships so you can focus as much on tennis, because that's what in the long term pays the most bills. So in retrospect, looking back through this, what type of people did Roger have around? I know I went maybe a little too deep into each of these people, but I think the stories are interesting and it gives you really unique context around who Roger is and how he views people coming in and out of his life. So first, he likes to mix things up. He's had a lot of coaches over his career, and they've all brought different elements to his game. He does trial runs. So I didn't talk about this at all, but there's a guy, Darren Cahill, who was Leighton Hewitt's coach. And he brought him in for a week, 2 weeks to see if he would be a good fit. They didn't end up being a good fit and working together, but they still obviously are on good terms, and they just wanted to try it out. He did this with Paul Annacone with all these other coaches. They come in for a week, see if it works, and can go their separate ways if they need to. He has these other people who help him focus on tennis. So you have Mirka, you have Toni Godsick, you have Severin Luti, and a little bit Pierre Paganini, who are there for the longer term, but they're facilitating things. They're acting as a sounding board, and they're buffering him from a lot of the decisions that need to be made. And then there's these people that really know him well, Mirka, Severin Luti, and Pierre Paganini, that can help him navigate all the experiences that he has and talk about what he's going through and problem solve for him. If we're thinking about our own lives, I really stress who I have around me and who can help me in all of these different categories. I have some friends that I can talk with anything about. They've been my friends for a long time. I have other friends that are newer friends that are very targeted in terms of how we can help each other. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of value in that. There's also these people who are brought in for very specific things, like Tony Roach, like Peter Annacone. There's a lot of Peters in his life as well. I don't know if that was by design. As great as Roger is, it's always good to have another pair of eyes, Higueras told me. People ask me sometimes, what can you possibly tell Roger? He knows everything already. Luti once said to me, but I realized over the years, he wants to hear it again, even if it's a small thing, like stay lower to the ball, because he says sometimes he forgets things or just doesn't realize. So Roger's using new people or even his old team to reinforce these things, to remind him of things. And I think that's important. There's also something very special that he's amicable with all of them. I haven't heard of a single relationship with Federer going sour, and he really values these people in his life, and you can tell that by how they all talk about him. From our own selves, how do we go about finding and cultivating these relationships? I think if we're really introverted, it might be harder, but it can be done. I'm not saying you have to go out and meet all these crazy people, but it can help by being curious, by asking questions of people, really learning about them. I think in a one-on-one setting, being able to learn and talk to people is very valuable. We might find advantages. We might find things that they can uniquely help us with. And I really highly encourage doing that with anyone that you think might be an interesting friend or partner or coach. The next thing is vetting people. So doing trial runs like Roger has. I think that's probably why he has such a high success rate, is he brings people in for a week, they simulate what it's like. And if it's great, great. If it doesn't work out, there's no hard feelings between them. And the last thing I think is probably not for everyone, but it's learning to enjoy spending time with people. Again, if you're super introverted, maybe not for you, that's okay. I think Tiger and Kobe were both more on the introverted side, and they still had incredible careers, but they also had a little bit, I think, less successful overall teams. And being able to, socialize, get to know people, and spend time with them, you start to see who might fit into your own circle really well. I want to end this section on the right people with this little quote. I think the road that he's taken and the coaches that he's had, I believe he's done phenomenally well in all his transitions, even without a coach for some time. And then Tony Roach, I thought it was a great decision. I thought that Jose Higueras was a great decision. Paul Annacone, you can see that with his transition and his growth. I think he's made an incredible choice with his coaches and loyalty towards them. I believe Ivan Lubicic probably made the biggest improvement in his career after Peter Lundgren, in my opinion, just because he was finally stepping into his backhand. So all of these coaching decisions from the outsider's perspective were adding to Roger's game. And he seemed to be unbelievably good at making these decisions over time. To me, this is an advantage that you don't necessarily just get overnight. It's something that compounds over your career if you're continually adding and bringing in and out really good people to work with. For better or for worse, if you look at a corollary in entrepreneurship, there's very few entrepreneurs that have success as just being a lone genius. It's usually about building a team, getting them to execute really well, and keeping that momentum going. I think it can work the same way in sports. You probably have more lone geniuses in sports, but you can't discount how important a team can be. So I obviously went really deep down the rabbit hole of the who and building a team with Roger, but there's also an element of perspective change that helped him to overcome a lot of the deficiencies that he had. Now we're going to talk about some of the things that changed his perspective and what a perspective shift can mean for our own games, our own level of success. So aside from the right people, I think a major perspective change happened in Roger's life that really was a huge force in changing his approach. So there's a couple different reasons why his perspective changed. The first being something I referenced before, which is Peter Carter's death. I want to talk a little bit about what that meant to Roger, and also a little bit about how we might be able to gain perspective without necessarily someone close to us dying. I think that the goal is for us to change and improve ourselves without necessarily having to go through the negative repercussions that a lot of these athletes have seen. So hopefully we can figure out some ways that we can create perspective, again, without having to deal with the negative consequences. That's one of the benefits of learning from other people, learning from other stories, rather than us having to necessarily live through the challenging things that other people have gone through. Cahill told Lundgren that Peter Carter had been killed in an automobile accident in South Africa on his honeymoon while traveling to Kruger National Park. Carter was just 37 years old. Federer's mother, Lynette, had helped arrange the trip, and Federer had often urged Carter and his Swiss wife, Sylvia, to make the journey. So this means even more to Federer because his mom and Roger encouraged Peter Carter to go on this trip to South Africa, where they ended up getting in a car accident. At once, Federer could see how trivial tennis was, but he also suddenly had clarity on how he'd have to dedicate his life to the sport if he was to make the most of his talent. It was the first death Roger had to deal with, and it was a deep shock for him, his mother Lynette said, but it also made him stronger. Roger says, any defeat in tennis is nothing compared to such a moment. I usually try to avoid sad moments like this, and it was the first time I'd been to a funeral. I can't say that it did me any good, but I was very close to him in thought once again, and I could say goodbye in a dignified setting. I feel somewhat better now, especially in matters concerning tennis. In time, those around Federer noticed a change in him, and he would qualify for the 2002 season-ending tournament, the first time he had been among the group of 8 elite players. When Peter died, it was a wake-up call for Roger, Bob Carter said. I think he realized that if he was to become a top player, he would have to calm down on the court. The next summer, Federer won his first Grand Slam title, and Carter was in his thoughts. I guess we would have had a big party if Peter had been here. I hope he saw it from somewhere. So, Peter Carter's death puts tennis into perspective for Roger. So a lot of us, when we're growing up, we think it's the worst thing in the world that we miss a cut, or we don't win a tournament, or we get beat, or we strike out, or any of these bad things happen. When you zoom out in the scheme of things, they really aren't that bad. And if you have some reference point that, hey, it can be a lot worse, but it can also be a lot better, you sort of hone in on what each individual game means to you. When you have this reference point that's so far out, something terrible happening, you can start to be more objective about a loss in tennis. A loss of tennis is not a loss of life. It's not the end of the world in any stretch of the imagination. From that point on, Federer understood that his success validated Carter's efforts and honored his memory. Carter's life had been far too short, but at least Federer could achieve what Carter had envisioned on the court. Then that life had served some part of its purpose. I did find a new motivation, Federer told me. In Carter, he had a cause greater than himself, one without a clear finish line. Roger said, every time I play well or I play a good shot, I think of Carts upstairs. I look up and know Carts would be looking down on me from above and that he'd be proud of me. Roger wanted to let me know, I think, that he credited Peter with where he was at and that he was committed to being the best player that he could be from then on. So this was one of the first real signs of adversity in Roger's life, but it also gave him a little bit more of a sense of purpose. We talked in the Tiger Woods episode about what purpose means for achieving goals. So it gives you this additional motivation pool. It gives you all of these other things. And we don't necessarily need something bad to happen to develop a purpose in our life. We can just start doing a bit more introspection. We can really think about what it all ends up to. And all of the bad things that happen to us generally seem small in the scope of our purpose. This also added a new layer of motivation for Roger in his life. And I think that that's pretty important. And in the scheme of things, it also helped him to bond with someone like Pete Sampras. So Pete Sampras also lost one of his coaches at a young age. If we look in sports psychology, we also see that the more we can disassociate from our performance, the better we generally do. So if you realize that I'm more than a tennis player, I'm more than a golfer, I'm more than a basketball player, you're more resilient to any of the bad things that happen to you. If your identity, if your self-worth is directly tied to your performance, when you start playing bad, that can be something that causes a true negative downward spiral. And there's pretty good research associated with this. If you want me to dive more into that, please let me know on another episode. I personally have had something like this happen. So the closest person to me in the world when I was around 21 passed away. It was my cousin. He was a year or two older than me, and it was a freak accident. And to that point, I was a C student at best. I wasn't pursuing my goals of playing professional golf. I was playing sort of club golf and partying too much and doing all these things. And that moment to me, I mean, again, I'm not comparing myself to Roger Federer in the same way, but I had this same perspective shift, is that, wow, life is so fickle. I should really make it meaningful. I should pursue something that's bigger than just what I'm doing, because you never know how long you're going to be around. And I think that there's different ways that people can approach that. Some people might say, oh, you can die anytime. I'll live this completely hedonistic lifestyle. Myself, and I think Roger took the same approach, is I should make this meaningful while I'm here, because you never know what happens. You should relish and appreciate all the relationships and all of the opportunities that you have, because you never know when they're going to go away. And again, I don't think this is something that you need from experiencing a loss like this, you could fabricate this, you could make this a part of your life just from hearing about this concept in like a podcast, for example. Maybe even here is that, hey, you can find a purpose bigger than yourself, and it can drive you in a very powerful way to give you this sense of perspective. There's also this idea of self-awareness that Roger has developed, especially from seeing himself on TV, which is surprising, but not all that novel. It was in Rome in 2001. I was playing with Murat Safin, each of us behaving worse than the other. After the second set, they showed on the stadium's giant screen how furious he was, and then how furious I was. He and I, he and I, he and I. As I watched it, I felt profoundly ashamed. And I told myself, this really can't go on like this. That was a career-defining moment for me, he told me many years later. I started to feel uncomfortable after a while when you're on TV like this. It's just a bad look when you see yourself throw a racket in the corner and you're like, oh my God, and you're looking around and you're so frustrated and disappointed. And I just said, this just looks stupid and silly. Let's get your act together a little bit. It took me a long time, It was interesting. It took me a long time. So looking at yourself in the third person, again, as we talked about in that chatter episode, is a very powerful tool. If you're seeing an athlete act all crazy and be out of control, you might think, oh, that's foolish behavior. He's hurting himself. But if it's you're too close to the situation. You're just feeling your emotions in the moment. By zooming out and looking at it from a third party, it can truly have a profound impact on your perspective. This is something that Freddie Adu's performance coach. So there's a great series, a podcast series on Freddie Adu by Mark Wall, who I believe unfortunately passed away. A subset within that is Freddie Adu's performance coach. And something he would do is he would film Freddie Adu on the bench and then also film him on the soccer pitch. And what you do by doing that is you see your behavior, you ingrain your behavior, and you get to look at this from a third-party perspective. If you're looking at that third-party perspective, you might not like what you see. And it's a lot more actionable to change those things if you're looking at it, again, from a different perspective than the first person. So doing anything that you can to create this outside observer effect can be very powerful. I highly recommend any coaches, any players, whoever it might be, film yourself not just when you're in action, film yourself when you're on the bench, film yourself when something goes bad. Understand how you react in those situations and how you look from the outside looking in. That's something that a lot of us don't really evaluate and think about. Roger also realized objectively that this was hurting his performance. Federer had reverence for the increasingly grand settings in which he was playing, but he also recognized that his outbursts were impacting his performance as he advanced deeper in draws. I knew I was getting so drained from my behavior, so I could come to like the quarters of a tournament and be like, I'm so tired. It wasn't because of the matches, but because of the way I felt during the matches. It was so emotional. The funny thing was, when I was 12 or 13, everyone behaved like me. So he realized he needed to change. It was normal when he was a kid, but as he developed, it no longer became normal. The people who were succeeding in that domain were self-selecting out. And I think this is an important observation for him is if you really care about winning, you care about being a legend, you care about being elite in your sport, this seems like a low-hanging fruit that is preventing you from getting there. And he was able, obviously, to reconsider that. And I would imagine his team had a lot to say about that as well. But it was enough to finally calm Federer, at least on the outside. Inside, the blood still boiled. Yep, you could say that, Federer confirmed. It was about learning to control the flames instead of extinguishing them, about converting them into a slow-burning fuel rather than a bonfire of distraction. And as we looked at what his sports psychologist Marcoli was saying, it was about targeting and controlling the emotions rather than getting rid of them altogether. This is Roger himself on his approach to managing his emotions using this metaphor of fire and ice.
Am I happy? I always call it the fire and ice situation, the fire wanting to win, being excited after a good point, and the ice coolness of accepting losses, accepting bad shots, accepting the crowd, the tough circumstances. And I think I found the right balance after 3 years on tour, and I looked in the long term. I hope to play for 15, 20 years, and I just decided that I was going to act that way and behave that way on a tennis court, so I would never lose matches because of my mental strength. And I think I was able to achieve that. Of course, I still get nervous. Of course, sometimes I still don't play very well, but I can trust myself, and it's been really interesting to see my evolution, I think.
What I really like here is that he's using a metaphor. He's using his imagination, his creativity to manage his emotions. That's something that we see with Kobe, with all these other athletes, is they're using metaphor, they're using their mind, and they're framing things in a specific way to be able to control their behavior or their physicality. That's something that, again, I've stressed a lot in the Kobe episodes, but we're going to see it everywhere here. This mental evolution, this gaining perspective, it wasn't an overnight thing. But for me, it happened virtually overnight where I made this behavior change. But for Federer, it was something that happened over a longer period of time. Roger knew he was doing something wrong with screaming and shouting and being upset, showing it too much, he said. The other players are not stupid. How are they going to beat you? Not by playing tennis. They beat you mentally. So we learned that. But then he got too mellow so that he was no good either. And all of a sudden he found a way. For Federer, there was nothing sudden about it. He felt it was a 2-year progress, one that began after Hamburg in 2001 and culminated in 2003 at Wimbledon, just as a lot of the game's chattering classes were openly wondering whether Federer genuinely had a champion's mentality. He had played 16 major tournaments and had yet to get past the quarterfinals, losing in the first round on 6 occasions. Now, this is Paul Annacone on why he needed to change and how he managed his emotions.
But he said, ultimately, I just realized to myself that if I'm that emotional and those things can knock me off the rails, then I can't think my way through what's going on out there. And you know, he used to say, and I need to be able to find solutions. And I can't find solutions if I'm really emotional and things are going awry. So I had to figure out how to manage the emotions and get disappointed, but not let it ruin the rest of the match, and be happy and not let it ruin the rest of the match. So I just basically made the decision myself after getting a bunch of feedback, both myself and also hearing it from his parents and hearing from other coaches. But really, he said it was himself that just hit the switch and said, I got to get better at this.
So I'll turn this around. How can we add perspective to our own lives? So I recommend referencing that episode, that deep dive we did on the book Chatter. To me, that's an incredible way to gain perspective. There's psychology around psychological distance and looking at things from a third-party perspective. There's ways that we create time distance from things, where we're looking about how would this look in the future? How would we feel about it? If we were a kid viewing this, how would we feel about our behavior? There's also things that have a larger impact on ourselves, like awe. There are situations that are truly mind-blowing to us, whether it's in nature, whether it's experiencing or viewing something that is so much bigger than ourselves, we can start to realize how small we are in the scope of things. Something that I really enjoyed, I read this book by Neil deGrasse Tyson called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. You know, no commentary on deGrasse Tyson or anything along those lines, but the book gives you a perspective of how vast and massive the Earth and the universe and even our solar system is. And that was unbelievably humbling to me to think about how small we are in the scope of space, but also in the scope of time. And if you're looking for a little nudge, that could be something that could be potentially meaningful into how you view these things. The next thing that I believe was instrumental in shaping Roger's transformation was his personal view of improvement. So let's dive into that and understand how he viewed progress, how he viewed change, and how this compared to some of the other people we've studied before. Let's start with Federer's own view on his personal improvement.
I always questioned myself in the best of times, even when I was world number one for many, many weeks and months in a row. At certain times during the year, I said, what can I improve? What do I need to change? Because if you don't do anything or you just do the same thing over and over again, you stay the same. And staying the same means going backwards because the other guys are working hard and improving. So I always needed to find ways to improve my game as well.
So for Roger, just like many of the people we studied, staying static is losing ground to everyone else. So he believed that maintaining the same level in pro tennis was actually losing ground, a belief that he rubbed off on his younger rivals. The number one requirement to succeed at this level is, I think, the consistent desire and open-mindedness to master and improve and evolve yourself in every aspect, Djokovic told me. I know Roger has talked about this a lot, and I think it's something most top athletes in all sports can agree on. Stagnation is regression. Now, it's important for us to think about that in terms of a Tiger Woods parallel. So if you remember, Tiger, when he felt like he was doing maintenance with Butch Harmon, was very displeased. He felt he constantly had to be working to improve, and maintenance was regression for him. Now, we're seeing this in other athletes as well. And I think that that's an integral part of the mindset of these great champions. Even though Tiger, by trying to improve his golf swing and to work on things, he might have taken small steps back, he got to where he was because he was always looking for ways to improve, and he wasn't resting on his laurels at all. It's a lack of understanding of the greatest athletes of all time to think that they're just okay with maintaining what they have. From what I've seen so far, and this could change in the future, just staying where you're at is not something that is acceptable by the greatest of all time standards. Something that Roger would do particularly well is that he would evaluate his weakness and really work to improve those areas. So he himself obviously was willing to work on his strengths as well, and his coaches were focused on touching his strengths, but there's a clear understanding of what he needed to work on, and he was willing to do the drudgery to get to that point. Federer understood or came to understand his weaknesses and addressed them. Anger management, mental toughness, concentration, endurance, a chronically sore back, and his single-handed backhand drive. He switched tactics, attacking more from the baseline than the net. He switched to a larger-headed racket to increase his chances of thriving in extended rallies, and switched coaches repeatedly, but not impulsively, to get fresh perspective, and sometimes went without a coach at all. So he also didn't address all these things at once. He was very meticulous in the things that he would work on. He tried to make one change to master it and move on sequentially, not doing all these things at the same time. This is, again, a parallel we see with Kobe Bryant, where he would truly master each of these different things and integrate it into his game over time, rather than trying to do all of these things and pick them up at the same time. He also consistently worked with different coaches to improve his backhand. He worked on these technical areas of his game pretty insistently. I think a really interesting case study to look at how improvement is viewed is comparing this to Rafa Nadal. It's instructive to read the passage in the Spaniard's autobiography, the Spaniard being Rafa, about the tactics he used against Federer in the 2008 Wimbledon final, and how he would only hit to Federer's forehand if he lost concentration or had a rush of blood to his head. Otherwise, every ball was sent towards Federer's backhand, and that was on grass. On clay, Nadal's whippy, heavily spun forehands would rear up and have Federer hitting his backhand just where he did not want it, above shoulder height and around his ears. I'm certain that Roger's backhand improved and that he adapted to how Rafael played against him, Tony said. So that's Tony Nadal, Rafa's uncle and coach. On every surface, not just on clay, but on hard courts and grass as well, Rafael would be attacking Roger's backhands. If Rafael hit 3 or 4 balls to Roger's backhand, more often than not, the point would be Rafa's. But that was true during their first few matches. After those meetings, Roger changed his way, including his position. He went further in the court, and then it was different. I'm convinced Roger thought to himself, this isn't enough, my backhand isn't enough at the moment, and he knew he had to improve. So that's what he did. So we're talking about a very isolated incident or an isolated scenario, but this is showing the evolution of Roger Federer. If there's something that people are using to beat him, just like his mentality and these types of things, he goes in and he works it out and figures it out, and then he identifies what the next thing is. Roger has had the benefit that a lot of his opponents target his weaknesses, so he can very clearly see what they are and work to overcome them. Roger also really enjoyed the challenge. So we've talked about this with Kobe, we've talked about this with Tiger. They look for this adversity in what they're seeing. The French really challenged me, and I had to work so hard for it in 2009. It was such a huge mental win for me. The unbelievably close matches against Tommy Haas and Delpo. Even Malfi was tough, and then Soderling in the rain. It challenged me on many levels, knowing that Rafa had been knocked out, because when is that ever going to happen again? So when I look at the French, I see it as a challenge I came to grips with, and I see a lot of mixed good emotions. You think about how many people would view something like this as a challenge versus as a high pressure moment. So what happened in the 2009 French Open is that Rafa Nadal was knocked out early. So Rafa Nadal is one of the greatest records of all time in the French Open. I think he's won 11 of the 14 French Opens that he's participated in. Whenever he was playing it, you could reasonably assume that he was going to win it. And he had beat Roger in the French Open, again, I believe, the 4 years prior. So Rafa's out. A lot of people might see, hey, Roger, this might be your only chance to win the French Open because Rafa has been knocked out. And a lot of people might view that as additional pressure. Roger viewed that as a fun challenge and something that he could really pour himself into. And he did go on to win that. Some would say that it was an easier route. I would say that there was dramatically more pressure because that could be the only chance that he had to do it. And he went out and executed it. He says Roland Garros, which is the French Open, or where the French Open is played, I've come to love it, Federer told me. I've come to, how do you say it, embrace it. In terms of his view of performance and improvement, he always has had the long-term vision in mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when it comes to his goals in part 2 as well. I finally have the green light and I finally can give 100% in practice again, because it wasn't fun sort of being there halfway, he said. I didn't enjoy that too much, but again, it was interesting. You've got to go through those moments as well. I know through a career, a long career, maybe as number one, you have to go through injuries and sickness. So this is when he's coming off his injuries, I believe in 2014 and 15. He has some knee injuries for the first time, and they're talking about him coming back. And Roger wants to wait to come back because he's thinking about, I want to play for 5-10 more years. If he does that and comes back too early, he's jeopardizing that. So he's willing to wait and delay gratification in order to be ready to be able to do this for a long period of time. And he's all into this improvement. One of my favorite things about Federer here is that he never believes that it's too late to change and improve. This is something that we're seeing with a lot of athletes that we've studied. We definitely saw that with Kobe Bryant. But Roger was willing to make even larger changes than a lot of these people late into his career. He felt that he had to innovate to survive and to dominate, and he was willing to make massive leaps in order to do that. Changing rackets in 2014 had been a ballsy move, which at the time almost felt like he was starting out again. But more progressive was 2015's creation of a new shot, a half volley service return hit just short of the service line that he called Sneak Attack by Roger, SABR for short, or Fed Attack. For years, Federer's tennis had been the closest that the sport has come to performance art, with his cinematic flicks of the racket, those through the leg tweeners, and other trickery. But this is the first time he'd been such a risk taker. When Federer played the shot and then dashed into the net looking for a volley, there was a danger of him looking like a fool. But it could also work beautifully. Borderline confrontational, the SABR could leave opponents dumbfounded. This one shot changed how we saw tennis. The desire to take a more attacking approach continued and intensified on the practice court as he prepared for 2017. The result was futuristic, aggressive remodeling of his single-handed backhand. Once, Federer would have been minded to slice most of his backhand returns, which often allowed his opponent to take control of the point. But by coming over the ball when striking his backhand return, he could be the one to take the initiative. It may sound a simple change, but in fact it was a significant technical switch, and more importantly revealed a shift in psyche. The inhibitions had disappeared, he was playing with freedom, maybe even abandon. In this shot, it was possible to detect the influence of SABR. Some observers felt that those upgrades to his backhand also led to improvements in his whole game. With greater confidence in his backhand, there was a more balanced feel to his tennis. Federer's movement had always been exceptional, but now, with less reliance on his forehand, it seemed even better. So, late in his career, Federer is willing to change both his physical approach and technical approach, as well as his psychological approach, being more aggressive. I think that that's very impressive. Again, Kobe was willing to do this with the Black Mamba, so he was able to use this new psychological tool later in his career, in the middle of his career after he was going through that ego death. What he did the year he turned 36 was incredible. He actually improved. Federer knew he had to refresh his game and was willing to do so. Roger doesn't view change and adjustment as a shock to his system. He knows he has the talent to adapt, and he's very happy to make those changes. 2016, that would be his last appearance of the season. He used the remainder of his year to rest and strengthen his body. Practice weeks in Dubai and Switzerland provided the opportunity to work on his game, to innovate in a way that only he can, blending the classic with the highly progressive and ultra modern. So this is maybe a little teaser of what we're going to touch on later with who he learned from, but this is something Federer did really well. He was willing to go outside and get new opinions, but he also studied how the greatest of all time did it, how the people that came before him did it, and he was able to blend these styles. I find that fascinating and really cool. The type of tennis he was playing before he made those changes, he wouldn't have won another slam. It was courageous to adapt, but that's why champions are champions, as they're always trying to improve. An aspect of improvement is getting feedback, and Roger was pretty open to that even from a young age. We find that maybe a lot of prima donna athletes, people who have a lot of talent, they don't take feedback well, and they in turn surround themselves with a lot of yes people. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for really long careers. Roger, from an early age, learned that his actions have consequences. Grovenfeld, who was the head of Swiss tennis, I believe, was loath to suspend or banish a young player, but he did believe in punishment. Federer, a night owl and famously late riser, was ordered to wake up early for a week that winter and clean the courts and the facility, including the toilets. The story has become a central element of Federer's narrative, a tough love tale that helped remind him that the rules are rules, in Switzerland at least, also applied to young tennis geniuses. That was the kind of teenager I was, always testing the boundaries, Federer said nearly 20 years later in Biel. It's what my children are doing with me now. It's only fitting. So there's two parts of this. Roger is willing to bear the consequences of his actions, of his anger. Again, he couldn't control himself, but he was willing to do the work to make things right. But his coaches and the team around him didn't punish Roger by taking away tennis. They punished him in different ways. They let him still enjoy the game, which I think is really admirable on their part. They could have very easily squelched his love of tennis by or inhibited his growth by taking that away from him. He also values immediate feedback in his career. You get the review right away. You know if you're good or bad. It's like musicians a little bit. And I tell you, it's a good feeling to have. Even if you're bad, it doesn't matter. Go work at it. At least you know you have some work to do. And if you're great, it gives you confidence and motivation that inspires you. In sports and performance, immediate feedback is unbelievably important. The quicker you can iterate, the quicker you can learn what's wrong, and the more objectively you can tell what's right and wrong, the better. And sports are one of the most, or individual sports are one of the most beautiful platforms where you can see that. I can go play golf and I can hit a shot and I know if it was a good or a bad shot. I know if I struck it well, I know if the outcome's good or bad. Same thing in tennis. You can know if you went out and played well. You can know if you went out and played poorly. You can know if you played well and your opponent also played well. It's something that you get almost a real ground truth on. And I don't think we relish that quite enough in the performances that we have. I also think that there are subjective elements in our performance, and we should do our best to try and be as objective as possible about evaluating our performance. Yes, you might not have had as many points as someone else, but did you play well based on the situations you were put in? Did you play well based on how many shots you actually took versus how many points someone else scored on dramatically more shots? These are all relevant factors. We've got a knockout system every single day. It's not like soccer. You can leave on Sunday, it's 1-1, and you're going to go sleep okay because nobody lost. With us, it's black or white. There's no place to hide. And on top of that, there's a grind of what we do 11 months of the year. So it's challenging, but Federer genuinely loves it. This feedback also bleeds into his team. So Federer is definitely not someone who has a lot of yes men around. Federer, according to those who worked closely with him through the years, would come to value internal debate and constructive criticism. But at 16, he was craving backslaps and faith. I wanted to hear, "That's awesome, Roger. That's a great plan," he said. I think people can really help young people by telling them, "All right, go for it. I'll support you whatever path you choose. But of course, you also have to be realistic. When you're no good, you have to realize it's okay to stop, because some people go too far and then they get blindsided by it." So you're seeing, again, two sides of this, where early in careers, you have to build people up. You have to give them the confidence before they can go out and execute. But as your career is progressing, you really have to know where you stand in order to be able to improve and work on the right things. Federer and Gotzik bantered with familial ease, raising their voices slightly when their opinions differed. This did not feel like Federer was traveling with a band of yes men. It's just like the rest of his disposition. You can disagree with Roger, and he doesn't take it personally. His pulse rate doesn't get up. He's happy to sit and talk about it and go, okay, I get that, but he can take a step back and really objectively evaluate things well. Luti said that he and Annacone realized when they were both coaching Federer that it was more effective to give him two different takes than to reach a consensus view and present it to Federer with a single piece of advice. He likes to hear the different opinions, then decide for himself. He always gives you the possibility to be yourself and express yourself and be honest. And for me, that's key. I think that's one of Roger's greatest strengths. We don't agree on everything all the time, but I think that makes it interesting. You're the greatest tennis player in the world at one point, and you're still willing to take feedback from these coaches, from these different perspectives. To me, that is how you innovate and how you grow. Even if you're great, there's always room to improve. And it's clear that Federer really embodies that. Roger's also willing to test and experiment as part of this. So it's not just that he's open to new ideas, he's willing to try them out itself. Something completely extreme, Federer said. I told him, you have to chase me around the court, put a ball even outside the doubles court, doesn't matter. I have to chase down every ball, knowing that I can slide, stretch my back, go down low, just to get the ball back, no matter how I play it. I have to be able to hit those. Otherwise, I don't know deep down if my back is really holding up, because I was scared sometimes. So it's not just testing and experimenting new moves. He obviously did that with Sabre. But in order to build his confidence around playing his best tennis, he has to test his body as well. So he had back issues that are recurring over time. Again, a very small injury in comparison to pretty much all the other athletes we've seen. But in order for him to go into a tournament and trust himself, he has to test that on the court before. Federer's serve had suffered from those doubts as well. That's why my serve let me down in Australia this year against Nadal in the fifth set, because I was scared it was not going to hold up. It was subconscious. I was scared without wanting to be, and I needed to put in some serious and specific practice. A lot of serves in a row, knowing that my back can handle it. After that, it all came together. So he's getting feedback from his body consistently. He's stressing his body in practice to make sure that it holds up on the court. I think a lot of us, if we're injured, we go easy and then we go into the game and then we realize, oh, maybe I should have pushed a little bit harder in practice. This to me is a good lesson in body maintenance. Bringing this full circle, what is your own personal view of improvement? So to me, this comes down to a growth or a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset, is you might be familiar with, is the idea that we can continually improve. A fixed mindset is that, oh, I'm as good as I am now, and my skills are essentially fixed. They're set. We start to see a lot of fixed mindsets in great athletes. In young kids that are coming up, they believe they're talented. They're always going to be talented, but they don't necessarily believe that they can get better than they are. And that's a function of them believing that hard work will turn into results. I think that Roger learned very early that his hard work, his working on things, do translate to results. And he also is focused on the process of improving, not just on the end results themselves. So how do we build a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset that's being open to new things, being open to our ability to improve, and also being rewarded for our hard work, not necessarily being rewarded for the outcomes that are there. Roger's parents, his team does a great job of rewarding his effort and his practice, more so than just rewarding the victories that he has. Our view of improvement shouldn't stop at a certain point. You see all the athletes we've studied, they've wanted to improve, they've wanted to change things over the course of their career. And I think that that's a better alternative to trying to get to a place and stay there. It's better to continue to want to improve than to just stay static. So your game is going to change over time, and your sport is going to change over time. How do you evolve to those things? Over the course of all this study of Roger Federer, I've learned how much tennis has changed. There's virtually little serve and volley now. It's a lot of baseline bashers. The game has sped up. People are serving faster. How do you adapt to that? But also, as you get older, as you're not as quick as you used to be, how do you evolve your game to play your best tennis or play your best in your domain, or even if you're not an athlete in your industry, how do you keep up with that based on your own individual attributes and the way you've changed, as well as with the game has changed. I think it's important for us to look at the dynamics between our sport and ourselves and our own evolution. So with that being said, I want to dive now into Roger's confidence. I think him building confidence in his ability to change is a major factor in him actually making the changes himself. When it comes to confidence, you have to believe that you can achieve something before it becomes a reality. And I've been listening to the Founders Podcast a lot. This is a common theme. Pretty much all the greatest entrepreneurs, showmen, whoever it might be, believe they're capable of achieving their goals before they go out and set forth and do them. Some of this can come naturally. Just it seems like we're destined to do it, as in, for example, a Kobe Bryant. Or it can be what I believe manufactured a little bit, like Tiger Woods, where he's saying affirmations, where he's telling himself these things all the time. For Roger, it seems like he had just always believed and wanted to execute on those beliefs. Roger didn't always concentrate during the sessions, Gakowski said. Sometimes he would hit some shots and then shout, whack, pow, with this shot, I win Wimbledon. Some of the balls would be hit to the back fence without bouncing first. He would tell me he was going to be the world number one. A lot of other kids would also say they had those same dreams, but it was like Roger was born with a racket in his hand. He had such natural talent. So he wasn't basing this off of nothing. Obviously, a lot of kids say these types of things when they're little. I said that I wanted to be a professional baseball player when I was growing up. And then I realized inevitably there was a realization that physically it wasn't gonna necessarily work out, but I also didn't necessarily put in the work necessary to do those things. I did feel it was possible to aim for the stars, and thankfully there was Martina and others who did great in sports in this country, Federer told me. So Martina was the first Swiss person to win a Grand Slam. I think we can do a little better job to believe, like in America, that anything is possible and dream big. I feel that can sometimes block us from going all out and saying, let's take a chance, let's go for it. Let's follow our dreams for 2 or 3 years and see what happens. But half and half doesn't cut it. If a guy in China or Russia or America or Argentina or wherever trains 5 hours and you only train 2, how's that going to work? It's not realistic then to become the greatest ever or do the best. It's not by dreaming that you're going to be a top 250 or that you're ever going to win Wimbledon. This is a really poignant point, is we could probably instill more belief in kids. We should have that belief, but there's a next step that we have to execute on that belief. We have to put in the hours, we have to put in the work to be able to get to where we want to go. And the fact that Roger himself is saying this means he understands this. He has to outwork his competition. He has to do things differently than they would in order to achieve results that they wouldn't get. Did he still truly believe that he would win this tournament one day? This is talking about the French Open. Yes, Federer answered. From Federer's perspective, it was one man, just one, who was blocking his path to completing his collection of Grand Slam singles titles. Why shouldn't Federer believe that he could solve the riddle at Roland Garros, just as he had solved the riddles of Lleyton Hewitt and his own temperament earlier in his career? Well, he's tough to beat, but he's not impossible to beat. That's a big difference. So he's talking about he's talking about Rafa Nadal at Roland Garros here, who is constantly beating him. But it's only one person. In tennis, in any sport, you always have a swinger's chance, which means you can reasonably win. Roger's also winning against every other opponent. He's overcome all these other obstacles. Logically, it lines up for him to be able to achieve something. If we think about achieving our goals or proposing goals through logic, it can surprisingly be more refreshing than you'd think. When we're a kid, if we have these wild goals of playing professional golf, of winning a major, of doing any of these things, I actually don't think it's unreasonable for kids to believe like that. There's so much that goes into that goal that they're on the early stage of that process. There's so much opportunity for them to get good enough to do that. If we're late in our career, if you're a 34-year-old who's making podcasts in his basement, maybe the goal of winning a major golf tournament is out. But because the window to do that and all of the skills and those things necessary are not necessarily built. But you should set really ambitious and fun goals as a kid, but also open-ended goals so they're easy to get to. because it doesn't defy logic to do that. That's really what I'm getting at. Roger also does a great job of feeding off of wins to be able to maximize his confidence. Federer stepped to his right and smacked a forehand return winner down the line that the onrushing Sampras was nowhere near reaching. Sampras's 31 match winning streak at Wimbledon was over, and Federer dropped to his knees and rolled onto his back, hands covering his face, before jumping to his feet for the handshake as the tears started to come. I had the feeling I could beat him, Federer told us. I had the feeling all the way, that's why I won. Nothing elevates a young player like beating a superstar on one of game's biggest stages. I think the Pete Sampras match changed everything, Lundgren said, because then everybody knew who he was. If you beat Pete Sampras on center court in Wimbledon, then you know you can play. And after that, he was on the map, basically. So there's the belief that he could beat Pete Sampras. Again, anyone has the swinger's chance. But once he fulfills that, once he's able to execute on that, he is now creating this momentum where he's validating his own work, he's validating his results, and he realizes he can continue to do this at future stages. But I do think when Fed won, and this is after his second Wimbledon in a row, that took him instantly to another level. That was the first time he was a back-to-back champ at a Grand Slam event, and then he was well on his way to the greatness. Until that point, I felt like there was a little separation. Maybe they need a big tournament win. That then is going to make them believe. It's like what I needed. I needed to win Wimbledon to say, like, okay, I can do this every week. And maybe they also need to overcome that, because maybe for the time being, these guys can't come out and say, like, I want to go be world number one, because everyone's going to go, ha, Novak is number one. Yeah, how are you going to get through Rafa, buddy? So being able to validate your results and continue to win to create momentum like this, one, Roger is talking about the importance of getting that validation, but there's a good scientific backing for this. So there's this concept called the winner effect. There's a book written about this idea. And the more you win, the more that creates momentum to continue winning. It's not just a psychological thing. There's also a physiological phenomenon that happens when you do that. So they did an experiment with rats that's been validated in humans. And essentially, they drugged one rat and they had it fight another rat. And it might have been mice, but the rat that won the fight, now when challenged with that other rat who was not drugged, continued to win at dramatically higher rates. And what they saw was that the rat that won, there was an increase in testosterone. There was a physiological hormonal difference in winners compared to losers. And for some of us, we might be scared, oh, is my testosterone going to drop after a loss? Well, technically a little bit. But if you frame your losses as wins or as learning, you can mitigate and basically get the physiological benefits of winning from almost any circumstance. So the idea here is that we can frame almost anything as a win, and we should try to do that as much as possible. But in the circumstances of Roger Federer, where he's creating this incredible winning streak, it does feed itself and continue to feed itself forward. I mentioned his 23 final winning streak. That was one I'm really proud of, he said. I wasn't really famous for consistency when I came along, so I turned that around, and that makes me feel really good about myself. To know when it really matters, I can find a way to be always on top of my game and pull it off every single time, even though I know that streak might end very quickly. So he's a winner for this entire streak, but he's also compounding that effect by considering a win to have that streak to begin with. How we frame these wins, again, is something that I put extra emphasis on. He also is able to leverage his experience winning into creating better mental states for himself. I don't think I was necessarily the better player, Federer said. It was just my experience that got me through, being in so many slam semis and him never being in any. Federer would require nothing so dramatic. He had the confidence of knowing that he had beaten Soderling in all 9 of their previous matches, and he had just bested him on clay in Madrid. He had the full approval of the crowd, which gave Federer a standing ovation as he walked on the court just behind Soderling. At one point in Roger's career, he's essentially had a win against any of the stiff competition he's played against. He's won against Rafa, he's won against Djokovic, he's won against Leighton Hewitt, he's won against Safin, he's won against Del Potro even. And he can feed off of all these previous wins. He can feed off of all this previous experience. So continuing to win, he has this backlog of all these victories that he can draw from, whereas not as many people have that experience that he does. And I think that's a very valuable place that he can go that not many other people can go. We all have this catalog of wins that we've gone through. We just might have to be a little bit creative about where we find those if we're starting out in our career. Tennis's dirty little secret, Andre Agassi once observed, is that winning your first Grand Slam title changes nothing, apart from gaining all the trappings of success. A dinner, jet, you win a cow if you win Wimbledon. That might have been true of Agassi, whose first major also came at Wimbledon in 1992, but that certainly was not the case for Federer, who likened his affectionate embrace of Wimbledon's Challenge Cup to cuddling a newborn baby. Winning changed almost everything, including how he felt about himself, his standing among his peers, and his future ambitions. So this is all how Roger framed winning compared to how Agassi framed winning. Agassi, it seems like, framed winning as a burden. Oh, I have to go do all this additional stuff. I can't practice as much because I'm in the public eye. He's framing a win like a loss. Roger is truly framing a win as something he can build on. This is Federer himself on getting to world number one. I think this adds a little bit of good perspective.
I thought it was somewhat hard to actually get to world number one. I mean, it is very hard, of course, but I was very close and I was very nervous getting there. And when I realized that I was close and maybe never going to become world number one, I started to stress out. So for me, the time of getting to world number one was quite stressful, to be honest. And once I got to world number one, I actually started to relax because I felt, you know what, I've achieved almost everything I ever wanted. And now I have a choice. Do I want to stay there, or was I just happy to be there once? And I decided I would like to stay there. So I worked extremely hard and tried to beat everybody and just have that mental determination and become just a different player, actually. And I really enjoyed being at the top.
Another part of Roger's confidence comes from other people. So we talked about Martina, who again was one of the first people from Switzerland to win a Grand Slam. He saw that someone in his community could do that. That made him believe that it was possible for someone from his background. After all, Mark Rosset had been an Olympic champion as well as a Grand Slam semifinalist, while Heinz Guntart and Jacob Halsick had both reached quarterfinals at the majors. From Federer's point of view, you might suggest this was ideal. Other Swiss players had achieved enough in the past to maintain a tennis culture, but not so much that there would be an intolerable pressure and expectation for him to emulate them. Federer had rubbed shoulders with the top players at an early age. So he's seeing the people that could do this. He's realizing he could compete with them. And he's also realizing that it's within striking distance based on these experiences. You see a lot of parallels here with Kobe seeing his dad play in Italy. He's experiencing and up close and personal with professional basketball players. And he realizes that he could do that. He also realized his dad did it. And he has a very good understanding of how good a basketball player his dad is. And I also see the parallels between Kobe seeing greatness and then expecting greatness in an early age. Here's a little quote from that. Yet in Kobe's insular experience, the answer was merely routine and logical. He had been raised not to see himself as an average young player. He was well aware of his bloodlines. Roger himself knows where he stands against these other players, and he sees it as a clear possibility to take it to the next level. Confidence isn't always about thinking big. Sometimes it's about thinking small. And this is something Roger did well as well. Some athletes like to tell you that self-belief makes anything possible, that confidence can overcome any challenge or adversity. That's pretty much Hollywood's take on elite sport. Dream big, they say. As it turned out, Federer's run at the Australian Open would be a triumph for thinking and dreaming infinitesimally small. This win, it came so far from left field. Federer has since said, I'm 100% truthful when I say that not for 1 second did I really believe I was going to win. So this is when he won the Australian Open. I believe it was in 2017 or 2018. And he was coming off of injury. It was one of the first, it must have been 2017. It was one of the first events he played, and he ends up beating Rafa Nadal in the final. And the reason he played so well is because he was thinking about the next shot. He was thinking that, hey, I could go out and I could win any individual match, but he's not thinking about the big picture. Oh, I'm going to win the tournament. He's thinking about, okay, I just have to put my best foot forward here. And if I win that, If you go and ask him, do you think you can win any individual match? Of course he would say yes. I knew from the start I could be dangerous, he said. In terms of the tournament, I felt the road was long and very difficult, but for one match, I thought before the tournament that I could do something against nearly anyone. Now, can I do it match after match? I still doubt it, but in any case, this result gives me confidence. So one of my favorite golf books is called Vision 54 by Pia Nielsen and Annika Sorenstam. And the idea is that almost any golfer is capable of shooting 54 on 18 holes. If I go and I look at my home course, pretty much any scratch golfer, maybe I should refine it. If I go look at my home course, I've gone out and birdied every hole that's out there. I'm certain that I birdied the first, second, third, all the way down to the last hole. I probably eagled a good portion of those holes, at least all the par fives. So what is preventing me from doing that sequentially? In theory, it is possible because I know I can birdie every single hole. I would just have to go out and do it sequentially. There is no real limitation that is preventing me from doing that. And chunking it and doing that and doing it like that means that you've sort of unlocked a lot of the scoring barriers that you might have. It's the same thing with Federer here. He knows he's beaten almost every one of these players before. He knows he can hit any individual shot and execute it perfectly. Why not just connect them together? Obviously easier said than done, but from a psychological perspective, I believe this can really free you up by chunking down rather than chunking up. Confidence also doesn't necessarily have to come from other people, from other tennis players. It can come from other places as well. But my confidence on the court is not who I am. It's something that every psychologist today advises young tennis players, not to make their self-worth dependent on winning or losing. It sounds simple, but it's not in this sport. When victories or defeats have severe consequences and are always personal. So he has a family, he has friends, he has a great team, he has a partner, he has kids, and these are things that give him value off the court. We talked a little bit about how the perspective he had from all of these other things. This is one other way to do that, is your family, all of these other things probably are more meaningful in the scheme of things to you than the performance you put on in your sport. So when we're thinking about this for our own lives, how do we build our confidence? So something that's very obvious is that belief precedes performance. So something we can do is review our past wins. Every single night, every day, I write down 3 wins that I've had every day. For example, today, one of my wins is that I recorded this episode. I got it out there. Still have to do some improvements on it, but I got it recorded. That helps to create momentum for us. That helps a little bit with that winner effect and that physiological effect. We can also frame things as wins. So we look for victories in everything rather than the failures in things. It's obvious that we might need to improve, that we didn't do something well. But to me, that's a victory that I know another area where I can improve and get better. We can also gain confidence from other people, seeing people in similar situations, whether it's our friends, whether it's people in our circles, or whether it's someone that comes from a similar background as us. Us seeing them succeed can give us belief in ourselves. And then the last thing related to confidence is thinking small. So we don't always have to think that big. If we chunk things down and realize we can execute one by one, that can give us incredible power going forward. Now, this last section related to Roger overcoming his shortcomings is related to who came before him. Something that I really think is important, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is studying these great athletes. Who did Roger Federer study to be able to make these personal changes? All right, so who came before Roger Federer? Who did he look up to? What did he learn from these people? This is Roger himself. He says, I always felt like, well, you're going to be respectful to older people, but even more so maybe to older tennis players, because those are my biggest inspirations and motivations when I'm playing tennis today. They did something very special that I could profit from even today. So Roger didn't like classroom learning at all, but he had an insatiable curiosity for tennis history and learning from tennis players. Federer was drawn to the history of his chosen sport, a curiosity that was only deepened as he proceeded to make so much tennis history himself. I asked a lot of questions, and I had a great bunch of guys around me when I came up on tour that educated me as well. They were like, look, this is somebody who played the semis at Wimbledon back in 1968, And this is somebody who won the doubles back in 1954. And I'd be like, oh, wow, please tell me about it. Throughout his life, he has sought out people who could serve as mentors, even role models for his next phase. From Sampras to prolapsarian Tiger Woods to more recently Bill Gates, whose philanthropic approach Federer hopes to emulate in his later years. So Roger's not just going within tennis, he's going outside of tennis to learn what it means to be a champion, but also what it means to be a good philanthropist. Roger Federer's foundation is doing some pretty incredible work in Africa. So Roger is half South African, half Swiss. Roger also honors history in his own way. We see a lot of athletes, people pay it forward. He does this as well. He created the Laver Cup, which is essentially like the Ryder Cup for tennis. So the first person he obviously emulated was Peter Carter. I talked a ton on him, not going to go too deep into him here, but almost every part of Federer's technique can be traced back to Carter. In subsequent years, Carter's parents, Bob and Diana, have taken comfort from seeing flashes of their late son's tennis in Federer's performances. Every time Federer serves and volleys, or plays a slice backhand, or displays variety, Carter's parents remembered that was how Peter played the game too. I think it's a nice homage to his parents, but also definitely something he picked up along the way. Roger also emulated Boris Becker. So just across the border from in German-speaking Biel, young Federer and his friends took note, and Becker was Federer's first tennis idol. So one of the first people that he really looked after. Someone who probably had the most outsized effect on his career was Pete Sampras. So very much how Kobe emulated Michael Jordan, Roger was doing something very similar with Pete Sampras. Kobe also became good friends, and Jordan was an incredible resource for Kobe, and there was a very similar relationship to this with Pete Sampras as well. In his youth, Federer was given the nickname Le Petit Pete. Both he and Sampras had superb serves and could do damage with their forehands, though they might not stand up to comparison now, as there are many more dimensions to Federer's tennis. Sampras could hit all the different serves with one toss. So then, as you go about your career, you also try to incorporate some of the things while making it your own, Federer told me. I was always playing around with my toss, seeing if I could hit the other way with a kicker toss or hit a kicker with a flat toss. And I actually realized I can do it all. So he's pulling moves, he's emulating how he serves to try to get better. Now, Sampras was a veteran champion, almost exactly 10 years older than Federer, whose game was, in many respects, a tribute to Sampras' success. From the one-handed backhand to the devastating running forehand and the acrobatic improvisational moves, consider both men's leaping backhand smash. Both had a rhythmic no-step service motion from the so-called platform stance, in which they kept their feet apart as they tossed the ball, then bent their knees and leaped as they struck the serve. Many other players, including Nadal and Murray, take a step back with their foot after the toss. Sampras and Federer were the same height, 6'1", and same listed weight, 176 pounds. They even used the same racket, the Wilson Pro Staff 85, with its comparatively small 85 square inch head, which had so much feel on well-timed shots. So we saw this again with Kobe and Michael Jordan. They were roughly the same size. They had a lot of similarities, and why not emulate the person that is most similar to you in style and size and these types of things? It was also an important relationship for Federer. Who else but Sampras could truly relate to how Federer thinks about tennis, about how he might be feeling and how he might be experiencing the sport? Before Federer, it was Sampras who had held the records for the most Grand Slam singles titles and the greatest number of weeks spent at number one. Why the two even have a coach in common in Paul Annacone. Federer said to Sampras, so Federer is the one that initiated this relationship. Federer said to Sampras, let's go out for dinner. Let's hang out. That, according to Sampras, was when the friendship really began. I didn't know Roger that well before then, and the first day we were a bit shy with each other and didn't really know how to act around each other. But once we got past that, it was great, and we realized our personalities are similar. They played a series of 3 exhibition matches in Asia in November of 2007 and another match in New York in March of 2008 that drew nearly 20,000 fans to Madison Square Garden. Traveling together in Asia created a bond. Pete was one of my heroes, Federer told me. I wanted to have those experiences while I was still active and not just doing something like that when I retired. I think there's a big difference in doing it earlier in your career. It was a lucrative tour, but it also fit Federer's interest in developing meaningful relationships with the players, he had admired in his youth. He would later hire Stefan Edberg as a coach. This is really interesting to me. Federer cared so much that he took time out of his training schedule to play an exhibition and really do this while he felt Sampras could still play and do this effectively. Obviously, there's a financial perspective on that where I'm sure they were lucrative. People wanted to see that, but it was important for him to establish this relationship as well. Obviously, this paid dividends for him in the long run. Pete Sampras says, "I'm not sure I would have, but Roger was open and willing to do it. We hung out, we shot the shit, just talking tennis, talking sport, talking just like two guys getting to know each other. And ever since then, we kept in contact through technology and texting." They also, as I mentioned before, shared this experience of their coaches passing away early, and that was something they bonded on and helped each other process. So for Sampras, Tim Gulkinson, who guided Sampras to number 1 and 6 major titles, died at 44 in 1996 from an inoperable brain cancer. So both Sampras and Federer had to work through their grief on tour at a young age, and they each found inspiration in their mentor's memory. I thought this was just funny. So Sampras and Federer, a major NBA fan, attended a Los Angeles Lakers game together and met Kobe Bryant, who was a major tennis fan and informal advisor to players like Maria Sharapova and Novak Djokovic before his tragic death in a helicopter crash in 2020. So all of the roads are connecting. And they'll continue to further connect, I promise. Another person that Roger looked up to is Andre Agassi. "I'm not surprised that Andre wants to keep going, even at 35, Federer told me. As long as he's not playing with pain and he's happy to play a few more tournaments a year, why shouldn't he?" For anyone searching for hints about Federer's own long-range plans, that was a big one. He had been watching Agassi closely, but he would soon be watching Nadal much more closely. So Roger is looking at Agassi, seeing how he's playing later into his, later in age in his career than a lot of other people, and he's taking notes about that. You'll see that Roger is applying this in the next section in part 2. So Mark Rosset is another person. So Mark was the best Swiss tennis player until Roger came along. "I wanted to take him under my wing, make him feel part of the squad," Rosset said. Rosset had brought his PlayStation, which was of course catnip to Federer. It quickly became difficult to tell whose room it was. "One time I left to train," Rosset said, "and I came back and he was in my room playing again. And I said, 'Do you mind? Can you leave me in peace for a little while?' And Roger came out of his trance and said, 'Hey, sorry.' And he left to go to next door. He could be oblivious, but it was also cool and fun. After that week, I always thought of him as something close to a little brother." So this is when Roger was a lot younger. So this, I think he was around 16, 17, and he was on the practice squad to help the Davis Cup team play. And Rosset was on the Davis Cup team. And so from an early age, people are going out and creating these relationships with Roger, which I think is really good. And Roger, in turn, is doing that with other players himself. Bjorn Borg was also someone Roger took lessons from. So Federer has never been ruled by superstition as Borg was at Wimbledon. Borg insisted on staying in the same hotel, using the same locker, sitting on the same chair, having the same number of towels at his disposal, and abstaining from shaving and sex until he won the title or was removed from the draw. But Borg said he saw plenty of himself in Federer, not least in the way that they carried themselves on the court. We're very similar in the way Roger doesn't show his emotions either. He doesn't let it all out. Of course, he has feelings and emotions, just like every other human being. It's just that he doesn't like to show them in the stadium. I know how much he cares, but on the court, he's a cool guy. One of the greatest tests of Federer's mental resolve and emotional control came when he played Nadal in the Wimbledon final in front of the former champion he called a living legend. So Borg is that former champion. So Federer is also taking lessons about what he wouldn't do from these people. So Roger in part 2 about longevity, you'll see how important it is for him to not have a routine, to have variety, and to have a lot of these different aspects where the routines that Borg had would be way too rigid for him. He's able to see that, but he's also to take things like the stoicism that he has on the court and apply that to his game. Outside of tennis, there are plenty of other people. I'll sort of breeze through this section. Michael Jordan was a big one. So when Federer served, he sometimes stuck his tongue out the edge of his mouth, like one of his other idols, the NBA star Michael Jordan. He had another habit that he would later discard, bouncing the ball between his legs, between points and serves, with the flick of his racket, then catching it behind his body before bouncing it back through his legs again. Not bad for a Swiss who surely had watched a lot more soccer than baseball, but Federer is a sports fan and was also in his youth a big NBA and Chicago Bulls fan. When he was 17, he had posters of Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal in his room, as well as a poster of Pamela Anderson in a swimsuit. Roger cracks me up. Sports science and a better understanding of nutrition, training, and recovery were all factors. So was the ability for a player like Federer to put together a personal, highly qualified team and afford to bring his family on the road. But it was also useful to know that others were pushing the limits too. Roger says, "I love hearing these stories of Brady, Buffon, and NHL star Jaromir Jagr. I've always wanted to be a great athlete or a great player for a long time, and I was always able to achieve that. But seeing that guys were doing it before me and are still doing it for sure is an inspiration to help and a motivation." I really like he's going outside of just his sport. He's looking at the greats in other sports, not just in tennis. That's something we talked about quite a bit in the Kobe episode, where he's looking outside of his field. He's pulling things in. He's pulling insights in. And sports are probably the lowest hanging fruit, the nearest corollary. Another just quick connection is Tiger Woods. So Federer and Tiger were friends. They both were Nike and they were both IMG for a period of time. And he pulled a lot of inspiration from Tiger. But the optics were certainly helpful to Federer, with Woods at the peak of his fame. When Federer won the title, Woods visited the locker room, his white backward ball cap in place, to help Federer celebrate with some champagne. "It's funny, because many things were similar," Federer said. "He knew exactly how I kind of felt out on the court. That's something that I haven't felt before. A guy who knows how it feels to feel invincible at times." So it's interesting to contrast Federer and Tiger, is that on the court, he knew what he was feeling like, but Tiger probably couldn't reconcile with how Federer felt off the court. Federer didn't have all this pressure growing up. Federer was very open with the media. I mean, obviously there were things he kept personal, but he was very well liked by them. He was very authentic with them. And when he went back home to Switzerland, he had a lot of freedoms that he wasn't, Switzerland's kind of a private country, and he didn't have to worry about all these people ambushing him like Tiger always did. So in terms of learning from people before us, I think you're really ahead of a lot of people by just listening to this podcast. There's still probably plenty of people you'd like to learn from, but this is a great starting point. If it's not just sports you're interested in, the Founders Podcast, How to Take Over the World, there's so many different podcasts and resources, books as well, that you can learn about the people that came before you. I love learning about people, particularly in golf, who came before me. And I love learning about podcasters who came before me as well. And that's something I'm continuing to study. So I'd ask you all, who would you be interested in learning more about? Who would you like to study, or who would you like me to study? Please reach out on social media, on any of those places, if you have book recommendations or you have athlete recommendations that you'd like me to cover. So that's the end of part one. I apologize if it was a little bit long, but I wanted to be thorough. I think it's better for this to be well researched. I leave in the show notes and in the description on YouTube, there's chapters so you can skip around if a specific topic isn't super interesting to you. In this one, we covered how Federer went from a talented but volatile, immature, and lazy kid to being one of the greatest tennis players of all time, who exhibited the opposite of many of the characteristics that he had in his youth. He had incredible composure and work ethic later in his career, which is vastly different from where he was before. Again, this might resonate with many of you, is maybe you're not putting as much in as you'd like. Maybe you're not reaching your potential and you're looking for reasons why. We also touched on how he was able to make this evolution. So it starts with getting the right people involved and putting them in the right roles in his life. Next, we talked about gaining perspective. So how he was able to look at his life from a third-party perspective and to see maybe some of the things that he was too close to and be able to make changes around those. We also looked deeply into how he viewed improvement and how his philosophy allowed the changes that he needed to make to take place. After that, we dived into his confidence and what are the things that drove his confidence and allowed him to believe before he actually achieved. And then once he started winning, how he leveraged those into more wins. And finally, we touched on the people that came before him that impacted him. They were from tennis, but they were also from outside of tennis. And he took very different things from very different people. Again, all of the books and resources that I've used to make this episode are linked in the show notes and the description. In part 2, we're going to focus specifically on Federer's longevity. So how was he able to play for so long at such a high level without also really getting injured? He never retired during a match, which is an unbelievable record that might never be broken. So first, we start with his goals. So how he defined those. I think it's important to understand goal setting in terms of a career rather than just an individual year. Next, we're going to really dive into the aspects of his longevity. So the first is his love of the game, the second of his understanding of the lifestyle. And then we dive into both curiosity and variety, which are things that I believe enabled him to love the game so much and love the lifestyle so much. If you enjoyed this, if you found it useful, please share it with a friend. Just one friend is enough, as long as that person is an athlete, a coach, or someone who is in pursuit of excellence in their craft. Also, I would love if you would leave a rating. That's one of the best ways to help the podcast grow. So whether you're on Spotify, whether you're on Apple, any of these other platforms, please just leave a rating there. Finally, connect with me on social media. On Twitter, it's AthleteXPodcast. And on LinkedIn, you can just look at me. We're also on YouTube, so check that out as well if you want the video version, if you're not on Spotify. Again, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I will see you in part 2.